Okay, Shabbat Shalom. This is Hakham Melech Ben Yaakov of the World Alliance of Qara'im, and let's do this Torah study. Okay, let me get rid of this banner. Goodbye. Okay, so we are in Parshat Pinchas. I'm going to read through it in my best possible biblical Hebrew, and then, time permitting, we'll discuss it. So, let me share. Stop this. Okay, so here we are. We are starting in Numbers 25, beginning of Numbers 25, and we're basically going to the end of Numbers 29. So we've got 4 chapters, and I will read in Hebrew. How's the sound, by the way? Sound check. Can somebody let me know that the sound is okay in the comments? Because I have the fan on here. Shabbat Shalom, Bruce. If you would like to read a little bit, let me know. Okay, so here we go. We are in Numbers 25, chapter 25, verse 1. Yeshiv Yisrael ba'shitim, yahel ha'am liznot et benot Moav. Tikrena la'am lizivhei Elohehen, yochal ha'am, yishtahu le'Elohehen. ויצמד ישראל לבעל פאור, ויחר אף יהוה בישראל. ויאמר יהוה אל משה, קח את כל ראשי העם, וקרע אותם ליהוה נגד השמש. ויושב אהרון אף יהוה מישראל. ויאמר משה אל שבטי ישראל, לכו איש אנשיו הנצמדים לבעל פאור. Okay. All right, let's just go on. והנה איש מבני ישראל בא ויקרב אל אחיו את המדיינות לעיני משה ולעיני כל עדת ישראל, וחמה בוכים בתח מועד. Fly. Kill flies again. וירא פנחס בן אלעזר בן אהרון הכהן ויקם מתוך העדה ויקח רומח בידו. So Pinchas is the grandson of Aaron through Elazar. Okay, so that Aaron had 4 sons. They were I always get Nadav and Avi. No, Dotan. No, I'm sorry, Nadav. Wait a second. I always get Dotan and Avi mixed up with Nadav and Avi. Hold on a second. Aaron. Just regular Aaron. Okay, Aaron. I don't know why I always have this mental block. So, Nadav and Avihu. Okay. Dotan and Aviran were the assistants of Korach. Okay, so Nadav and Avihu, they died, as we know, and then that left Elazar and Itamar. Okay, so Elazar is the third born of Aharon, and Pinchas is Elazar's son. And Elazar is the Kohen Gadol at this point, right? Since he's the third born of Aharon, we're in here actually. So since he's the third born of Aharon, when Nadav and Avihu died, basically, actually Aharon has already died, right? So he is the Kohen Gadol at this point, right? We know that Aharon dies. Let's see exactly where. A couple of chapters back. So Aaron has already died, right? He went up to the mountain and he died, right? So Elazar is the Kohen Gadol at this point, right? Let's find that actually. Okay, Aaron. Beautiful narrative. One second here. High priest, conflicts, death. Okay, so that's in Numbers 20. So let's take a look at that for 1 second. Right, Aaron dies. So Numbers 20. We could just keep it in English to make it go quick. So the death of Aaron, the whole Israelite community sent out from Kadesh, etc., etc. They came to Mount Hor. Aaron will be gathered to his people. He will not enter the land I gave the Israelites, because both of you rebelled against my command at the waters of Meribah. Get Aaron and his son Elazar and take them up to Mount Hor. Remove Aaron's garments and put them on his son Elazar, for Aaron will be gathered to his people. He will die there. Moses did as the Lord commanded. They went up to Mount Hor in the sight of the whole community. Moses removed Aaron's garments and put them on his son Elazar, and Aaron died there on top of the mountain. Then Moses and Elazar came down from the mountain, and the whole community learned that Aaron had died. All the Israelites mourned him for 30 days, the same mourning period that was given to, for instance, Yaakov, okay, when he died. So, and where the rabbis get the idea of Shloshim, you have the Shiva, which they get, I'm pretty sure they get that from the, I'm not sure where they get that from. That was David fasted for 7 days while his son was still alive, and then the son died and he stopped that. I'm not sure if they get that from the incident with David, David's, the first son of Bathsheba. I'd have to look it up. Okay, but David fasted for 7 days while the son was dying, and then after he died, then David stopped fasting. At any rate, getting off track here. So here we go. Okay, so now they go up to the mountain. Aaron dies, and Elazar, they go down, and Elazar is now the Kohen Gadol, right? He's getting the priestly garments. So when we're speaking about here, Elazar, we're speaking about the Kohen Gadol. So Pinchas is the son of the senior moment. I hope not. So Pinchas is the son of, well, I've been doing it for decades. I always get those two parents and brothers mixed up. So I guess I had a senior moment when I was back in my 20s too. Okay, so Pinchas, to keep in mind, it's not just some shmo off the street. Pinchas is the son of the current Kohen Gadol. Okay, so I know very recently the son of the Kohen Gadol, is it the grandson? This is the grandson. No, it must be the son. I'm not sure now. I think it's grandfather, right? Of the Samaritans who I've met. I met once. Super, super nice guy. Abud Cohen recently got married. So that's, this is the son of the Kohen Gadol of Israel. Anyway, I don't know why I mentioned that, but I mentioned a lot of things that probably have no relevance. Okay, well, I guess it has some relevance. Okay, so here we go. So Elazar is, so Pinchas is a bigwig, right? He's not just some some random Israelite. He's the son of the Kohen Gadol and ostensibly the Kohen Gadol in waiting. Okay, so verse 8. And he took out a romeach. What's a romeach? So it's translated here as javelin. Okay, it's not a very common word. I don't know it from modern Hebrew. Let's take a look at this word for something. Romeach, a spear, a lance. So it does appear a bunch of times. The only time it appears apparently in the Torah is in Numbers 25, where we're reading it here. But it appears in Judges, Kings, Chronicles, etc., etc. Let's take one random instance of this word, Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 13. And it says, Ve'amid. So this is when Nehemiah is building the wall, and he puts guards around the wall while they're building it, so that the enemies of Israel in their return to Judah don't hamper the works. Ve'amid mi tachtiyot lemakom. So I put in the lower places of the lower areas of the place, behind the wall. So this is the Kri. I don't even know what that is. What does it? Higher places. Tzechayim is being translated as higher places. Okay. And I set up the people according to their families. Im harvotehem, with their swords. Ramahehem, there, and this is javelins, and here it's translated as spears. With kashtottehem, and their bows. Keshet is a bow, just like a rainbow is called a keshet, right? So yeah, that's the word ramach, right? I'm sorry, romach. So the underlying verb for that would probably be ramach, another word which I'm not familiar with, but let's go check it out. Romach. So I don't see it. Usually links it back to a verb, but I don't see it over here. So then we'll just move ahead. Okay, so that's that. So that is a romeach. A romeach is a spear or a lance or a javelin, as it's translated here. Okay, so this is what Pinchas did, the son of the Kohen Gadol, the grandson of Aaron. So he took this spear in his hand, or this javelin in his hand. Verse 8. Wa yavo ahar ish Israel el hakuba wa yidkor et shnehem et ish Israel wa et haisha el qabata wa te'atzer hamagifa. So then Pinchas comes behind this Israelite man, El HaQuba. So Quba is translated as tent, another word which I'm not really particularly familiar with. So let's take a look at it. A large vaulted tent. It only appears once, so that implies to us whenever we have these words that appear once in the entire Tanakh, these are called hapax legomenon. And usually they don't have any idea what these words mean. They're just taking guesses from related words, from etymology or from context. So let's take a look. Some commentators say, or Mr. Holter, who's pretty good. And we are in Numbers 25. Numbers 25. Where'd you go, Mr. Numbers 25? We are in Numbers 25. So, where are we? alcove. Robert Everett Fox. Okay, there we go. Everett Fox is translating it as private chamber. So we have three different translations. So this is very common when you have a hapax legomenon, when you have a word that appears only once or sometimes even only 2 times or 3 times. Nobody knows what the heck it really means. So I'm getting here from this, I believe this is the NIV. Let me just bring up the NIV for 1 second. So this is verse 8. So this, he left the assembly, further into the tent. So here we have tent. So the NIV is translating it as a tent. The Strong's is calling it a large vaulted tent. The BDB usually, the Strong's usually follows the BDB. So it's basically, most of the times it seems to be a summary of the BDB. So that's a large vaulted tent as well. So we've got tent, large vaulted tent. We've got in Robert Alter alcove. And then we have an Everett Fox private chamber. Okay, let's see if Robert Alter has a commentary on this. On the alcove, the Hebrew kubah is unique to this text, but has been linked with the Arab kubeh, which is a small tent. So there, he's also saying it's a tent of red leather used for cultic purposes, or alternatively for conjugal purposes. The English alcove actually derives from the Arabic al-kubeh. Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. A lot of times when you have words in Romance languages, and English is partially a Romance language due to the influence of French, right? The Normans invaded France in, I don't know, I have to ask one of my English friends, they know all this history, 1077 or something like that, I can't remember. And then French, the Normans were French, it's from Normandy, right? Normandy's in France, we all know that. Because of World War II. And so when the Normans invaded French, a lot of, over the next couple of centuries, a lot of French words, grammar, etc., moved into English. So English moved from being a purely Germanic language into basically a kind of, I don't know what percentage of words in English are derived from French? 30%, something like that, maybe? Whatever, let's say 30%, that's just an educated guess. Right. Right. All right. We'll go with 30% of English words are derived from French, which means that modern English is actually a quasi or semi, or not semi, but shlish, a third Romance language. So therefore, what I was going to say is that in a lot of Romance languages, and this doesn't come from Latin, of course, you will have, Arabic influence, and the reason you'll have Arabic influence. Might not come from French, it might come from something else. But the reason you have Arabic influence well, I shouldn't say all Romance languages. I should say specifically Spanish and Portuguese is because of the Moorish invasions of the Iberian Peninsula from 711 to 1492 are the official dates given for the Moorish occupation of the Iberian Peninsula, and so they injected a lot of Arabic words into both Portuguese and Spanish. So you will have a lot of Spanish and Portuguese words would start with al, and that is often a sign that it actually is Arabic in origin, and therefore Semitic in origin, those words, and therefore usually has a relationship to Hebrew. So I don't know where alcove came from. I'm not going to spend the time to look up the etymology right now, but maybe it didn't come from French, maybe it came from Spanish or Portuguese, and then moved into English. And but it can be traced back to alcove. The word alcove, if you want to look up the etymology of alcove. An alcove, the opening to the house, which we call the vestibules, can also be called an alcove. Okay, at any rate, so basically the bottom line is Robert Alter is essentially calling this right. So basically, I guess they all are calling it an alcove. Okay. The contention that the term here refers to the tabernacle, and hence that a violation of Israeli sanctum is at issue is strained because the tabernacle, Mishkan, is nowhere else referenced as the Kuba. The second occurrence of Kuba in the verse, if one follows the Masoretic vocalization, appears to be the same word, though it obviously puns on keba, belly. One is warranted to understand the second alcove as a rather transparent euphemism for the woman's sexual part she stabbed in her alcove. Oh my. Several of the medieval commentators follow this line of interpretation, invoking the principle of measure for measure. Wow, I like his comment. I often like Robert Alter's comments. I usually agree with him. Sometimes I don't, but that's a really interesting. That gives a lot of information there. So that's why I like his commentary. Okay, so okay, alrighty. At any rate, so okay, so tent, so into the alcove. Now I wonder if that's where the word Kaaba comes from, right? You want to look that up? You know, the Kaaba that they circle around. Isn't the Kaaba the stone? That's a Kaaba. Okay, well, if you want to look it up. Anyway, anywho, so there we go. So this word Kuba, which only appears once. So alcove, tent. I don't even know what an alcove is, except in the modern. Let's just look up the word alcove. Find alcove. I just know it is like an entrance to a house, but I'm sure it has a recess in the wall of a room or garden, a recess, niche, nook, opening, bay, hollow cavity, corner. Images. Let's get an image of an alcove. Okay, there we go. Here's an alcove. Okay. So those are all alcoves. Okay. So yeah, interesting stuff there. So okay, so we're gonna go with vaulted tent, right? Or we'll go with Robert Alter's, well, he calls it the alcove, or Everett Fox. Oops. Private chamber. That's a weird translation, but okay, we get the idea, right? Some kind of, they obviously didn't have buildings out there because they're in the middle of the desert. So unless they went over to the Midianite side. Anywho, so we'll go with 10, right? וידקור את שניהם את איש ישראל ואת האישה אל קבתה ותעצר המגפה מעל בני ישראל. So this kabata, okay, so here the NIV, let's look at that one, right? So it's the same word, kuba and kabata. Well, it's different. Here it has an u, and here it has an ah, right? But very similar, okay? So here we're getting a translation from the NIV of her body. We know that Robert Alter translated it as alcove, okay? And he says, oops, oh shoot. And he says that that's a euphemism for her vagina, okay? Robert Alter, Everett Fox gives us private parts. Oh, so he's playing off on it as well. Private chamber and private parts. So, so Pinchas was not fooling around, man. This guy was serious as a heart attack. Okay, he was not messing around. Okay, so what do we got? Is it better like this? Better like this? Let's go like that. Better like this? No, we'll go with that. Okie dokie. So where was we? Yeah. Just 1 second. 1 second. Okay, so kabata. So okay, stomach, right? We have the word keba. Let's just look at this for 1 second. So belly, right? Keba, cavity. So like an alcove, right? See Hebrew kabab. I'm not sure what the connection is. Kaba, Hana, kabali, it. Okay. Kaba. La cove. Okay. Got it. Huh. Can't really see how they're related, but look, utter a curse against curse. So this is kabab. So the there's a note here that kaba from kabab the abdomen is so it relates. It brings us to this Hebrew verb, which now is to utter a curse against, and I'm not sure exactly what the connection is. Let's see here. Is there anything we can glean from here? Well, we'd have to do a whole study. So I'm not really sure at this moment. Okay, let's move on, or else we'll just get bogged down. All right. So in her stomach, in her alcove, right, in her abdomen, I guess would be a better word, right? The opening in her belly. Okay. Okay. What'te'atzer hamagefa me'al bnei Israel. So Pinchas stops the plague, right? We had a plague going on because of the sex that they were having with the Midianite women. Verse 9, Aleph. So those who died in the number of people who died in the plague were 24,000. Pinchas's reward וידבר יהוה אל משה לאמור Let me move to a different place because bend over here. הישיב את מתי מישראל בקנאתי מתוך את בנתי. So because of what the and the Midianite woman, this very this public, the sudden of definitely by complete control. Pinchas takes the law into his own hands. He takes action, particularly what the plague. Show Jacob coming with Israel and being made Pinchas. Okay, and it's a covenant peace. Who is Aharat Olam Sher Kine and to be after him who not an eternal of the priesthood. Asher Kine, for his act. I'm sure of I've never got. Let's see if that plays itself out. So we want high priest. Let's see if we can get a list of all the high priests in Israel. Oh boy, no, we want the Jewish high priest. Ancient Israel, priest of Israel. So do we have a list of all the high priests? Get that, biblical narrative. One second. Powers, restrictions, political aspects. All right, let's read this right here, okay? Succession. The succession was to be through one of his sons and was to remain in his own family, Leviticus 6:15. If he had no son, the office devolved upon the brother next of age. Such appears to have been the practice in the Hasmonean period. That's too late. We're not interested in that period. In the time of Eli, however, 1 Samuel 2:23, the office passed to the collateral branch of Ithamar. See Eleazar. But King Solomon is reported to have deposed the high priest Abiathar and to have appointed Zadok, descendant of Eleazar, in his stead. After the exile, the succession seems to have been okay. So we're not worried about that branch. So let's see if we can get a list of high priests. List of high priests of Israel. There we go. Right back to Rabbi Wikipedia. Okay, so here we have Aaron, Eleazar, right? That's what we saw when they go out to Mount Hor and the exchange is made. Pinchas is the next one. And then we have Avishua, the son of Pinchas. Forget what the Samaritans do. Buki, the son of Avishua. Uzi, the son of Buki. Although Pinchas and his descendants are not directly attested as high priests, this portion of the genealogy is given in 1 Chronicles 6:3-15 is assumed by other sources. Well, let's take a look at that. Let's take a look at 1 Chronicles 6. 1 Chronicles 6. One Chronicles. Where'd you go, Chronicles? Here we go. 1 Chronicles 6. We'll just keep it in the English to make it go a little bit faster. So the sons of Levi, Gershon, Korach, Kohat, and Merari, the sons of Kohat, etc., etc. The sons of Aaron. Nadav, Avihu, Eleazar, and Itamar. Eleazar was the father of Pinchas. Pinchas, the father of Abishua. Abishua, the father of Buki. Buki, the father of Uzi. Uzi, the father of Zerahiah. Zerahiah, the father of Merayot. On and on. So this is clearly okay. So we have in order. Pinchas, then Abishua, Buki, Uzi, Zariah, and it goes on and on. So these all seem to be directly descended from Pinchas, who in turn is descended from Eleazar. Yochanan, the father of Azariah, it was he who served as priest in the temple Solomon built in Jerusalem. Okay, so let's go back here for a second. Okay, so although Pinchas and his descendants are not directly attested as high priests, this portion of the genealogy given in 1 Chronicles 6, 3 through 15 is assumed by other sources, including Josephus and Seder Olam Zutat, to give succession of the office from father to son. At some time, the office was transferred from the descendants of Eleazar to those of his brother Ithamar. The first known and most notable high priest of Ithamar's line was Eli, a contemporary of Samuel. So this is interesting. So we have Buki, Uzi, and then according to Wikipedia, it's transferred over to Eli. But if we look at the list in First Chronicles, we have Buki, Uzi, and then other people. Zachariah, Merayot, Amaria. Here it goes to Eli, and then it goes to Achitub. So these three are left out. Zachariah, is it Rahia? These three are not mentioned, right? Because we have, instead of them, we have Eli is mentioned, and then we go back to Achitub, Ahia. So Achitub, and then we go to Tzadok. But that was a different Tzadok. I don't think that was the one in the time of, well, it's complicated. It's complicated. I'm not sure where they're getting all of this from. And it would require an entire study, so we're not going to do it now. But what I will say is it does seem, at least to a certain degree, that this Brit, getting back to our verse here, Numbers 25:13, does imply at least that this Brit that was made, this Brit Shalom, for a Kuhunat, Brit Kuhunat Olam, right here, does imply that the high priesthood is going to go through Pinchas. It's going to go from Eleazar to Pinchas. Of course, the Wikipedia article mentioned that Pinchas is never officially mentioned as being the high priest. We can check that out very quickly, and then we'll move on. So Pinchas, here I can go fly. No, that away. Come on, you. Okay. So in Joshua, he's mentioned a bunch of times. Oh, it does say. Let's look at 1 Samuel 1:3. This fly is driving me crazy. Hold on a second. Making another attempt. Okay. So let's look here. Let's look at, for instance, Joshua 24:33. So this just doesn't mention anything in particular about the son. Pinchas ben Eleazar, Joshua 22:32. So I guess that would kind of imply Pinchas, the son of Eleazar, the priest. No, I guess it's referring to Eleazar, the priest. Yeshav, Pinchas ben Eleazar Kohen. No, so Pinchas is not. Okay, I don't know. I don't want to get bogged down. So let's just move on. Okay. So we were in here. We're up to verse 14. Washem ish Yisrael ha-mukeh asher uqah et ha-Midianot Zimri ben Salu Nasi bet Av Shimoni. So the person who was killed was Zimri ben Salu. Let's see one thing here. Who was struck down with the Midianite woman. Okay. Now let's see what Robert Alter has to say about this covenant of peace. Many understand the Hebrew Briti Shalom as my covenant of friendship or my fellowship. In any event, there's some iconic dissonance between Pinchas' bloody act of retribution and this covenant of Shalom between his descendants and God. This is not the only instance in blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, it doesn't say anything really about our question about what it means per se, this covenant of peace. Okay, let's go on. So this Zimri ben Salu, Nasi Beit Av le Shimoni. So he was a Nasi, he was a prince or a head of one of his father's houses, of one of the houses of Beit Av is kind of like a clan, I guess you could say, within the Shimonites. Okay. Chieftain of the Simeonite father's house. So the information about the name and lineage of the two culprits given only at the end of the story casts retrospective light on the implications of their act. This is not any man of the Israelites, as we might have thought, but a Shemonite prince cohabiting with a Midianite princess. The targeting of the Israelite chiefs for execution is perhaps to be understood in this connection. The sexual conjunction of an Israelite priest and a Midianite princess is not merely an encounter of desire between two individuals, but a treacherous model for the populace on both sides, an emblem of the religious and sexual blah, blah, blah. Okay, we'll get back to this in a second. So basically, I think the main point there that Robert Alter is making is that all of these are important people, right? This was a Nasi Beit Av. This was the head of a clan within the tribe of Shimon. The person who killed him, Pinchas ben Elazar, was the son of the Kohen Gadol, and we'll talk about the Midianite woman in a second. Okay. B'Shem ha'isha ha'muka lemidianot Cosby bat Sur Rosh Umot Beit Av B'Midianhu. Okay, so this was basically, as Robert Alter just pointed out, a Midianite princess. Okay, her name was Cosby bat Sur, and Sur was Rosh Umot Beit Av B'Midianhu. Okay, Umot is usually translated as again kind of like a tribe, I guess. So he was also the head of a Rosh Umot Beit Av. He was also the head of a clan of one of the tribes of Midian, right? So we have three very important people, three very high-ranking people. The first two within Israel and the third within Midian, all involved in this incident. And perhaps that's why that's why it stopped the plague. That's why it was considered it was enough to stop the plague, as we saw, right? When Pinchas killed Zimri ben Salu and Cosby bat Sur by poking him in the privates with his spear, then this turned back the anger of God, and the plague was halted. And maybe it's because of the the high-ranking position of these people that were killed, that it was enough to stop the plague, right? It was a real kind of like show. It would be like, I don't know, if someone were to kill the president and the vice president, maybe not that, maybe the vice president and the Speaker of the House, right? Then that would be a much different than killing two random people walking down the street. Okay. A warning against the Midianites. So we're in verse 16. וידבר יחווה אל משה לאמור סרור את המדיינים והכיתם אותם. So basically, go kill the Midianites. Okay, they translated here as harass, but it comes from the word tsar, make trouble for, harass. Robert Alter translates that as be foes to the Midianites. Okay, I like the translation actually. Kitzoradim hem lachem, because they have harassed you. They've been enemies to you. So be enemies to them because they've been enemies to you. From the word tsar, right? That's where we get the word tsarot or surus, right? It's the same word, right? Tsar means like unfortunate. Let's see if we have a text. Anyway, the word here is tsarar, tsorer, right? So shu, hostility towards, vex. I like that. Vex is a good translation. Okay. So getting back to this. Kitzorim hem lachem ba nichlehem. Right? Nichlehem is their schemes, I guess. A nochel is in modern Hebrew. A nochel would be like a con man, right? Or a con man, I guess you can translate it as. Asher niklu lachem al devar peor, al devar kazbi bat nasi midyan achtam hamukah. Okay, so that's kind of a summary. Okay, so now Israel's basically told to go kill them, keep them otam. And let's see what Israel does. So we're now in chapter 26. Just 1 second. Okay, so let's go back to chapter 26. And we have here census, okay? So, Wahi ahare hamagifa, Wayomer Yahweh el Moshe, el Moshe el Azar, ben Aaron hakohen lemor, שאו את ראש כל עדת בני ישראל מבין 20 שנה ומעלה לבית אבותם כל יוצאי צבא בישראל. וידבר משה ואלעזר הכהן אותם בערבות מואב על ירדן יריחו לאמור מבין 20 שנה ומעלה כאשר ציווה יחווה אל משה ובני ישראל היוצאים מארץ מצרים. Okay. So, just one thing here, 1 second here. Okay, so we have this census, right? Okay, so let's see let's get some commentary. The principal narrative sequence of the Book of Numbers, consisting largely of a series of incidents of rebellion, is framed by a census at the beginning, chapter 1, and a census at the end. The aim of the first census was a military conscription for the march through the wilderness, and that function was reflected in the numbering of all males 20 years old and above. Here, on the other hand, the census is intended to lay grounds for the division of the land as the Israelites encamped opposite Jericho, the first point of attack in the conquest, and the stipulation of males 20 years old is to indicate that the wilderness generation fated not to enter the land has died out, with the new generation having grown up to take its place. Right. So it would seem here from the context clearly from the context, right? So this Numbers 26. We're getting to the end of the book of Numbers now, right? And so getting back to chapter 26, right? So this census is in preparation for entrance into the land, right? The first census we saw at the beginning of the book of Numbers, that was when they left Egypt. And now this census, they've already wandered through the desert, ostensibly for 40 years. And now this is another census getting them Shalom, Jordan, Shalom. Oh, Ben and Ariella. Okay, excellent. Hello, Ben and Ariella.
Hi, how are you?
Good, good, good. How are you guys doing?
Doing good. Just getting settled here, getting things together. Thank you.
So you're in your new place?
Yeah,
You guys are in your new place.
Yeah, we're in a new place and much better.
Very good. Still in
I've been with you
the same country?
I've been with you for about a half hour, but that's okay. I've been hearing. Good.
Okay. I'm sorry. I don't always go back to the screen. So the best way would be to maybe text me on, if you don't see me letting you in a couple minutes, just text me on WhatsApp. I'm more likely to get a message regarding that. Although I don't always look at my WhatsApp during the studies either. But you guys are still in the same country, right?
Oh yeah, about a mile away from the other place.
Okay. Very nice, very nice. And it's a nice place you're in now.
Much better. Yep, very nice.
Send him some pictures.
Later.
What was that?
I said we'll send you some pictures later.
Oh yeah, please do. I'd be curious to see.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So, any comments or questions so far?
Not really. I was, of course, interested in the covenant of peace that was supposedly, obviously, I know the rabbinic view on that was that Pinchas became Elijah and Elijah had to suffer and all this stuff. I just, clearly this is all midrash.
Let me quote my one of the quotes that I posted on Facebook recently, which is now my new favorite Karaism quote from Yefet Ben Eli. Let's see if I can find this. Here we go. I will read it out loud. So, Yefet Ben Eli, who was a famous Karaite from the golden age of Karaism, once wrote. So it says, one of his comments about the Rabbinites, writing on his Arabic commentary on Isaiah, Yefet Ben Eli digresses as follows. This section refers to the people of the diaspora and to the best among them, meaning best among the Rabbinites. Well, no, it also includes the Karaites. You see, the best among them. Oh, my cat just jumped on the table. What, Lavi? Lavi, go down. Well, we'll just let him be. If you see a cat on the screen any second, then you'll know what's going on. Okay, so and the best among them as well. They are at present the people in the. He's talking about. So he lived in Iraq, and so he's talking about the exiles, the Jewish diaspora in Iraq. So they are at present divided into 4 classes: the exilarchs, who pretend to be the possessors of knowledge. The exilarchs were, well, basically they were the head of the rabbinical community or the Jewish community. The common people who neither desire wisdom nor think about it. They know no more about religion than to go to the synagogue from Shabbat to Shabbat and say Amen and Shema Yisrael. The studious among the common people, whom the exilarchs teach them the nonsense of the Talmud and sorcery instead of what might profit them. And the maskilim, the Karaite teachers, who, endowed with the knowledge of the Torah, are generous with the dissemination of their wisdom, in return for which they accept no recompense. So that's my take.
Wow.
Well, that's his take on that. So my favorite phrase there is, yeah, it pretty much says it all. The studious among the common people, whom the exilarchs teach them the nonsense of the Talmud and sorcery instead of what might profit them. So if the rabbis say that Pinchas became Eliyahu and blah, 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 that just fits right into that statement. That's the nonsense of the Talmud and sorcery. So has no relevance to actual reality.
Absolutely. Okay. That's one of those things that got my head spinning.
Yeah, it is the kind of thing that can definitely spin heads. Okay, so let's go on. So we're looking at the census here. This is the census before the Israelites. I think the cat might be hungry, and that's why he's doing it. Luffy, are you hungry? Oh, no. So, right. So now we have the census. I think I'm going to kind of skip through the census because we don't need to go through a bunch of numbers when we have a large parsha to finish. But I will point out any relevant things. Okay, so first of all, they're near Jericho. It says, let's go back here to verse 1. Okay, so so we know this is in the context, first of all, of God just saying before, God commanding Moshe to kill the Midianites, right? And we will see that is what happens. So right after that, now another census is being taken, and this would be ostensibly to gather the army to kill the Midianites, but it's also a census in preparation for entering the land of Israel, as we saw Robert Alter pointed out, and we know this because it says where the census is taken, right? This is in verse 3. So where are they? So they're in the plains of Moab. That's specifically where Moshe is going to give his final speech in Deuteronomy, or his final speeches in Deuteronomy. And that's where the Israelites cross over from Ariel, I'm just going to mute you guys. You can unmute if you need to say something. So that's where, of course, Moshe and the Israelites, not Moshe, Yeshua and the Israelites are going to cross over into the land of Israel from the plains of Moab, right? Right, and it mentions Jericho. We know that's the first place they attack, and so we see from the context here exactly, in place and by extension in time, that this is right before they're going to enter the land of Israel. So at the beginning of Numbers, we had a census, right? That's how Numbers started off. That's why it's called the Book of Numbers, right? So this was right after they came out of Egypt, the census in Numbers 1. And now here, finally, towards the end of the Book of Numbers, there are 36 chapters in the Book of Numbers. We're in chapter 26. So we're having another census, and this is a census before the Israelites enter into the land of Israel. So this is 40 years later. So where did this 40 years happen? Okay, I mean, we don't really hear much about what happened during the 40 years. If we go back even a couple of chapters, let's say to Numbers 20, maybe a little bit before that, Numbers 18. Wait, I have it here. One second. Let's get this out of the way. So, journeys. There we go. What do you want? Water? Here. So we just saw Numbers 10. So Numbers 10:33 mentions that the Israelites traveled a 3-day journey from the mountain of God, etc., etc. So in Numbers 13, the Israelites are said to be in Kadesh, which is in the desert of Paran. So they're just leaving Mount Sinai in Numbers 10. Okay, in Numbers 10 is when they're leaving Mount Sinai, and now we are in Numbers. I don't know how I got to 18. Now we're in Numbers 26, and they're already ready to enter into the land of Israel. So that means I'd have to go back and see exactly where. That somewhere between Numbers 10 and Numbers 26, 40 years have passed. And we hear very, very little about it, right? We don't really know. Shabbat Shalom Ephraim ben Yaakov. We don't really know what happened during those 40 years. Again, I'd have to go back and see exactly, put each chapter to a specific time. Maybe if I have time, I will sit down and do that, but not now. Okay, but now we have a census. Now it's 40 years later, and they're about to enter the land of Israel, and now they're doing a survey, a census of anyone who's 20 years and older, right? Miben esrim shana u'ma'ala, kashet tziwa Yahweh et Moshe u'bnei Yisrael hayotzim me'eretz Mitzrayim. So 20 years and older, we know that the curse on the Israelites was that the Israelites would die in the desert. The Israelites of the generation that went out of Egypt would die in the desert. Okay, anyone who's 20 years and older would die in the desert. Right, that's what it said. So this is now ostensibly. Wait, let me think about this for 1 second. So if anyone who's 20 years and older would die in the desert, and now this is 40 years later, that means that the earliest that means that anyone who is 60 years or older at this point is dead, right? Because we had the curse. Okay, let me just find the exact. Okay, curse that Israel. But within the spies, right? Will wander. So that's wait. Actually, I can find it without googling it. So the spies was Numbers approximately 10 or so. Let's just see here. This was after that. After that, let's just find this exactly. So the instruction, okay, so here's the spy. So we're in Numbers 13, okay? Okay, so this shows also that in Numbers 13, we're still speaking about, I guess it was basically the second year, maybe already the third year was mentioned. I can't remember. Either the second or the third year, right? So this is right after they came out of Egypt still, within about 2 years after they came out of Egypt. And we're in Numbers 13, right? So between, again, we said Numbers 26, now they're about to enter the land of Israel. It's 40 years later. In Numbers 13, here's where they get the curse that they're gonna wander for 40 years, right? So actually it's in Numbers 14. forgiveness, judgment. So let's just see exactly. 1 second. Yeah, so here in Numbers 14:22, it says, Kikola anashim haroim et kevodi, all of the people who saw my glory, wa'et ototai, and my signs, asher asiti b'mitzrayim, which I did in Egypt, ubamidbar, and in the desert, yinasuoti ze'eser pamim, and who have tested me already 10 times, v'lo shamu b'koli, and did not listen to my voice, im yiru et haaretz asher nishbati la'avotam, they will not see the land which I swore to their fathers. V'chol min atzai lo yirauha, and all those who go against me or give me give me trouble, or rejected me, will not see it. Avdi Kalev, so Caleb will see it. Okay, let me just skip ahead a little bit. Okay. Let's just find the exact. The plague on the 10 spies. And 1 second. Here it is. Okay, let's look at it here. Okay, verse 28. So we're in Numbers 14:28. Okay. Emor elehem, say to them, Hi ani neum Yahweh, as I live, declares Yahweh. If it is not as you said into my ears, right? They said it's better that we die in this desert. Okay, you're going to die in the desert. That's what he said. Now you're going to get exactly what you said. Okay, but midbar hazeh yiplu fikrehem lechol pikudechem lechol misparchem ben 20 shana u'ma'ala asher halinotem alai. So what's going to happen in this desert? Your corpses, your carcasses will fall. And all of the results of your census, basically all of your numbers, all of your ranks, from 20 years and older, who have complained against me. So basically, there it is, right? We see in Numbers 14:29 that God is saying explicitly, anyone who's 20 years or older is going to die in this desert. Okay? אם אתם תבואו אל הארץ אשר נשאתי את ידי לשכן אותם אתכם בה, כי אם Caleb ben Yefune ויהושע ben Nun. Okay? And it goes on, the only ones who are going to see it are Joshua and Caleb ben Yefune. ותפכם אשר אמרתם לבז יהיה והבאתם אותם וידעו את הארץ אשר מסעתם בה, and your little ones who you said are going to be destroyed or captured by the enemy, they're the ones who are going to go in and see the land. You're going to die in the desert. Your babies are going to see the land, but you're not. Okay? But your corpses will fall in this desert. Yes, Ariella or Ben.
It's a quick question. Was it from that day onwards that they dug a grave every night?
So that's what the rabbis say. That's the midrash. Obviously, that's not in I can't remember which midrash it's in, but let's look it up. Israelites dug graves every night in the desert. Lyrics? There's a song about it. Tani 30b. Okay. So here we are. This is in the Talmud. Just see something here. All right. So we'll just read the English. I'm not going to trudge through the Aramaic. So Rabbi Bar Hana said that Rabbi Yochanan said the 15th of Av was the day. So the 15th of Av is Tu B'Av, right? It was the day on which the deaths of the Jews in the wilderness ceased. I'm not sure where they get that from. Hold on, the cat is driving me crazy. Let me just put it outside. Let me. You hungry? All right. So yeah. The entire generation, the death in the wilderness ceased. The entire generation that had left Egypt had passed away, as the master said, after the sin of the spies, on account of which the Jews of that generation were sentenced to die in the wilderness, as long as the death of the Jews in the wilderness is not blah, 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 blah. Okay, I don't see it here. Maybe it's in Rashi. Okay, here we go. So Rashi says on Tani 30, oops, where'd that come from? So Rashi says on Tani 30, the day on which the death ceased in the desert, as it was taught in a Braita, I'm not sure where that Braita is, all 40 years that they were in the desert, every Erev Tisha B'Av, the proclaimer would go out and say, let each individual go out and dig his grave, and every single person would go out and dig, and every single person would go out and dig for themselves a grave and sleep in it in case they would die before they had dug. And the next day, the proclaimer would go out and proclaim, let the living separate themselves from the dead. And everyone who had the soul of life would rise and go out of his grave. And every year they would do this. And in the 40th year, they did it. And the next morning, everyone stood up alive. And when they saw this, they were astonished. And they said, perhaps we made a mistake in calculating the month. And it's not yet Tisha B'Av, etc., etc. Well, they returned and slept in their graves each night until the 15th. And since they saw the full moon, blah, 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 blah. Okay, you all get the idea. So that's that. So it's Rashi on Ta'ani 30b, and quoting some Braita, and I'm not exactly sure which Braita it is, but that is the story. So Braita is also something that's mentioned in the Talmud, which is supposed to be basically extra Mishnaic. It's something that is from the time of the Mishnah, but did not make it into the Mishnah. That's what a Braita is. Okay, well there we go. That's that, and that's where we get that story from. Okay, so right, and then we go through the census. Let me switch over to the English just to kind of skim through it. I don't see any reason to go through each of the numbers.
A quick question on the numbers that they're doing here. Again, I noticed, I think it was on the last census, they didn't do it in order of names again, and I haven't even thought about it this time. But is it in order of the tribes again, or?
You mean in the first census in Numbers 1? You're talking about this order here?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's
in
see
order
here.
of age, shall we say?
Right. Okay, so let's just look for 1 second. So first of all, here we have a list. So when the actual, so these are we have one list here, but really when it's taken, so here's the order. We have Reuben, Shimon, Gad, then Judah, Issachar, Zvulun. So if I'm not mistaken, if we look at a list of the good one. That's a better one. I think it's more clear. Okay, so here we have on the south side Reuben, Shimon, Gad. In Numbers 1, we have Reuben, Shimon, Gad. Okay, then here we have, here. Then we have Judah, Issachar, and Zvulun. So here we have Judah, Issachar, and Zvulun. Then we have the sons of Joseph, Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin. Here we have Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin. And then finally we have Dan, Asher, and Naphtali. Dan, Asher, and Naphtali. So we see that it's done in the order that they're camped around the tabernacle. That's the order that the census is done, because the census is basically It's basically a census of this is considered basically kind of an army camp, right? They're going to march in formation, right? So that's the way it's done. So we have first, once again, let's look here. So we have the Reuben, Shimon, Gad. So we have the south side. And if you remember when we spoke about this, we always noticed when it speaks about the marching order, it's always clockwise, right? So Reuben, Shimon, Gad. And then next we have Judah, Issachar, and Zvulun. And here clockwise is Judah, Issachar, and Zvulun, etc., etc. Okay, then we're going to have Ephraim, Menashe, Binyamin, and then Dan, Asher, and Naphtali. If we look at the marching order, let's just find this for a second. So the arrangement of the tribal camps, here we have exactly the same. We have exactly the same order in which the census was taken, right? Actually, no, that's not true. So we have first it's Reuven, Shimon, Gad, and in the marching, when it lists the order of the tribes around the camps, then it starts with Yisachar and Zvulun. One second here. Okay. Well, that's just listing the order, but let's see the marching order. One second. So these are the Levites. Levites. Purity of the camp. Did we skip the marching order already? One second. The Nazareth. Yes, it did. Let's go back then. It's got to be here in Numbers 2. Okay. It's with the trumpets. That's where it's going to be. Everything. So we're up to 6. So let's go to 7 for a second. Education of the temple. Next. Setting up the lamps. Passover. Silver trumpets. Okay, so Judah went first under the standard, then Reuben went next, then Ephraim went next, and then Dan set up next. Okay, so, all right. I mean, it gives a number of different orders. It's not the marching order, but what we do see, at least in Numbers 1, is that they're grouped by the order that they're camped around the tabernacle, right? So again, it's going to be the south side, followed by, then Judah comes next, followed by the east side, followed by the west side, followed by the north side. But the marching order, I think, is now, let's just see here. Anyway, I'm not going to go through the whole thing right now, but basically that's the order that they're listed in Numbers 1. It's the order that they're camped around the tabernacle. Camped around the tabernacle. Oh, okay, so we're. Okay, so the second census. And again, because it's just a long parsha. I don't think we're going to go through all of this. We could sit here and we could go through each person and find out who they were compared to the census at the beginning of the year. I just think it's going to be not a wise use of our time here, even though, of course, it would be interesting and important to do it. Let's skip down to the numbers 23. Okay, so verse 63, Ele pikudei Moshe wa Elazar asher Israel be'aravot Moab al Yarden Yericho. So these are the census that Moshe and Elazar, who took the census of the children of Israel on the plains of Moab al Yarden Yericho. Verse 64, Ube'ele לא היה איש מפיקודי משה ואהרון הכהן אשר פקדו את בני ישראל במדבר סיני. And among these there was not a single person from the census results that Moshe and Aaron the Kohen had done, had made for the children of Israel in the Sinai desert, referring back to Numbers 1, right? So there was no repetition is what they're saying. Of course, we mentioned earlier, except for Yoshua ben Nun and Caleb ben Yefuna, and of course Moshe is still alive, right? Moshe is not dead yet. He's going to die soon at the end of Deuteronomy, but he's not dead yet, which is kind of interesting. So everyone else is dead. Moshe is gonna die before he enters the land, right? But he's still alive. So Moshe, it's just an interesting thought I had. We always think of Moshe as being punished, right? He was punished because of the waters of Meribah, that he wouldn't enter the land. But he's kind of within the desert. He's still kind of last man standing, except for the two spies that had an exception, which were Yeshua ben Nun and Caleb ben Yefuna. Everyone else died except for Moshe. Moshe's still alive. He's going to die before he enters the land, but he's still not dead at this point, right? Because he's the one taking the census, right? The power has not been transferred over to Yeshua yet.
Melech, what about Pinchas? Did he die in the wilderness?
No, Pinchas was the son of Pinchas was the son of Elazar, and this all took place. The whole thing with the Midianites with the Midianites that we saw in the previous chapter took place in the plains of Moab. So it's clearly taking place right before, at the end of the 40-year period, not at the beginning of the 40-year period.
So he was apparently the high priest at that time.
Still at this point, Elazar was the high priest. Okay. So I don't know what's going to happen now. Elazar became high priest when Nadav and Avihu died when they brought the fire, right? So they were certainly around. So Elazar was already high priest, back in the day. So I guess Elazar is still alive, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe he was under the age of 20. Maybe we're going to find out when he dies. I'm not sure. It's actually kind of a good question.
We do.
Let's look it up for a second and see where Elazar is mentioned. So, Leviticus Numbers. My Elazar. So, already down here, 26 is still alive. Well, maybe the best way to do it would be this with Wikipedia. Okay, biblical narrative. All right, so he became. All right, okay, so he became high priest. I'm sorry, yeah, he became high priest when Aaron died, which was just recently. Elazar held the office of high priest for more than 20 years. He took part with Moses in numbering the people and assisted at the inauguration of. Okay, he assisted in the distribution of the land after the conquest. Okay, so he's mentioned already in Joshua 14. That's when the Israelites enter the land. So I guess the only thing I can imagine is that, let's see. So the whole thing with Nadav and Abihu, that took place way back when. That took place, right after they left Egypt, when right after the tabernacle was built. So that was already at the beginning of the 40 years. But Eleazar did not become high priest until Aaron died. That we just saw a couple of chapters ago. I guess the only conclusion I can come to is that when that curse was given to the Israelites, Eleazar was not yet 20 years old, right? Because he was the son of Aaron. He was the third son of Aaron, and he goes with the Israelites into the land of Israel. So I guess he was not. It's kind of weird because it mentions that. Let's see here. 1 second. אלה פקודי משה ואלעזר הכהן אשר פקדו את בני ישראל בערבות מואב ואלה לא היה איש מפקודי משה ואהרון הכהן אשר פקדו את בני ישראל במדבר. Okay, it doesn't really contradict. So here it says in verse 64 that when they took the second census, there were none of the people in the second census that were mentioned. So whenever I say the second census, we're referring to the census at the end of the 40 years, right before the Israelites enter the land of Israel. Whenever I say the first census, right after the Israelites exited Egypt. So I guess, and that census was for people 20 years and older. So I guess, the conclusion would be that Eleazar at that time was not yet 20 years old. I guess it's a reasonable conclusion because he was the third born son of Aaron. He doesn't become high priest until Aaron dies, which is much later. I'm not sure exactly when. I'm not sure if the Torah even says exactly when, but so I guess that's the conclusion. That would be the most logical conclusion, that Eleazar was not 20 years old at the time the first census was taken, and that's why he was able to enter into the land. Okay.
That makes sense.
I guess. I mean, stranger things had happened. If we had time, we could do a full investigation. But I would think that would be the most logical explanation that I could come up with right now. Okay, so verse 65. Ki amar Yahweh. Ki amar Yahweh lehem mot yamutu bamidbar walo notar mehem ish ki im Caleb ben Yefune Yehoshua bin Nun. Because God said to them, as we just saw, mot yumutu, you will all die, or they will all die in the desert, and none of them will remain. Not a single man will remain of them except for Caleb ben Yefune and Yoshua bin Nun. Okay, so that's that. Let's move on to chapter 27. Now we have the daughters of Tzalafchad. And again, we see here that all of what we're learning here, or all of what's being spoken about here, is in preparation for entering the land, right? Because the daughters of Tzalafchad, they're concerned about their inheritance in the land, or their father's inheritance in the land. So let's see what's going on here. And by the way, I think this is often misunderstood. This is understood as a huge feminist statement that the women will inherit the land, but that's not really what's going on here. The women, the daughters of Tzalafchad, as we'll see, are kind of acting as placeholders until their sons can then continue the inheritance, and we'll see about that, and we'll see how we know about that in just a minute. So I know a lot of kind of like feminists in terms of our love to point to the daughters of Tzalafchad. See, the women are inheriting, a portion in the land, but it's not really exactly the case. And so, and by the way, it should be pointed out that, so in clan and tribe, right? So it's always the head of the tribe who's who's inheriting the land, or basically who's doing anything on behalf of the family. The head of the family is the husband or the father, right? But he's obviously, whatever he's inheriting belongs to the entire family. He's kind of like, I always like to say, the CEO, right? You have in a corporation, the CEO is the public-facing figure within a corporation, right? But there may be tens or hundreds of thousands of people within the company, within the corporation, each doing their own thing to make the corporation work. The CEO just has a specific role, which he's the public-facing and final decision maker for the entire company. And that's really the way it works in the Tanakh and in pretty much all traditional societies. That the husband/father is the head of the family, and therefore is the official spokesman and the public-facing figure of the entire family. But whatever he has belongs to the entire family. It's not just his personal possession. He possesses it for the sake of his family, obviously, right? So it's not that the Torah is inherently anti-feminist. I think that would be completely incorrect, but it recognizes it's really pro-family, would be the way I would put it, right? Everything is based on the family and the clan and the tribe. Okay, so, but here we have the daughters of Tzalafchad, Tik Ravna, Benot Tzalafchad, Ben Hefer, Ben Gilad, Ben Machir, Ben Menashe, Lemishpachot Menashe, Ben Yosef, Wa'ele Shemot Benotav, Mahla, Nora, Hagla, Milka, Utirza. So the daughters of Tzalafchad, and then we have the lineage of Tzalafchad going back to Menashe, and ultimately back to Yosef, of course. And so these are his daughters. Now, who is it referring to? His daughters? I think it's referring to Menashe. I think Machla was Menashe's daughter. Let's just see here for 1 second. Daughter of Tzalafchad. Okay. I'm sorry, of course. Right. My mistake. Okay. 1 second. Okay. I'm sorry. I got confused there. So Tzalafchad is their father, and these are the daughters of Tzalafchad. Okay. Binotav, Machla, Noah, Hagla, Milka, Utirza. So Tzalafchad is a male, and he has 5 daughters. Okay, and they come to Moshe, and this is what they have to say. So they came before Moshe. They stood before Moshe. ולפני אלעזר הכהן ולפני הנשיאים וכל העדה פתח אוהל מועד לאמור. So basically, they come to Moshe and the leaders of Israel, and this is what they have to say. Avinu met bamidbar. That's talking about our father died in the desert. That's talking about Tzalafchad, right? So he was older than 20 years old when the curse was pronounced. Wehu lo haya b'toch ha'edah hano'adim al Yahweh bi'adat Korach, and he was not among the followers of Korach. They're pointing out ki b'chat'o met ubanim lo hayu lo, but he died in his own sin. I guess it's just speaking about again. I'm not sure exactly. That's kind of a strange phrase, but I guess it's talking about the same sin that all of the Israelites were subject to. I'd like to get a little commentary on that particular phrase. So let's see. His own offense, he died. So this is what Robert Alter has to say about this. Our father died. The choice of the favorite instrument of biblical narrative dialogue for making this case has expressive consequences. The issue of daughters' inheritance in the absence of male offspring is not presented as an abstract legal precedent, but as an impassioned plea for justice. Why should our father's name be withdrawn? Give us a holding by these 5 young women who fear that the patriarchal system of inheritance will deprive them of their rights. Though the notion of the daughters inheriting was exceptional in the ancient Near East, the story is something other than a feminist argument. Okay. So the chief concern is not to lose the inheritance pertaining to the clan. Exactly. not to allow the name of the clan to disappear, but since the holdings of the clan were defined within tribal territories, the whole system would have been upset if the daughters were to marry outside the tribe. The follow-up to this episode in chapter 36 therefore stipulates that they are obligated to marry within the tribe. So we'll get to all of that. Okay, and then this phrase, for through his own offense he died. This would most plausibly be the offense of all the adults in the wilderness generation after the episode of the spies. The daughters assume, as Abraham ibn Ezra notes, that the active conspirators against the Lord in the Korach rebellion are to be punished more severely by death and by denial of inheritance to their descendants. Okay, so that was the phrase for his own offense died, and that's pretty much what I was thinking myself. But that was kind of my understanding of this verse, that I was speaking about the offense of that all the Israelites committed when they complained against the report of the spies, or when they complained to God after the report of the spies. Okay, so where were we? Right. So our father did not have any sons. So here we are in verse 4. We're in Numbers 27:4. Lama yigara Shem Avinu mitoch mishpachto ki eno ben tana lanu achuza betoch achei Avinu v'yakrev Moshe et mishpatan lifnei Yahweh. So they're basically saying, why should the name of our father be reduced, be mitigated? What's a better word? All right, we'll go reduced. I'm thinking of a specific word in my head, but I can't think of it right now. Diminished. That's exactly the word I was thinking. Why should the name of our father be diminished within his clan? Because he doesn't have a son. Give us an inheritance among the brothers of our father. So this is their plea, right? Basically, they're saying if they hadn't brought their case, then what would have happened to the inheritance of their father? It would have been split among their uncles, among their father's brothers, okay, among their paternal uncles, right? So and that would have been the end of the father's line, their father's line, as inheritance, a land inheritance in Israel. Their father's line would have had no land inheritance in Israel. The father's brothers would have split their grandfathers, right? Their father's land would be split up among all of the next generation, which would include the Tzalafchad and his brothers. But Tzalafchad had no children, so Tzalafchad would not pass, or had no sons, so Tzalafchad would not pass that land on to anybody. Instead, the land that would have been passed on to his son or sons would now go to the families of his brothers, right? So that's their plea. So they're saying, no, let us take his inheritance, even though because he has no sons. Okay. Well, this implies again that the feminist narrative is that this is this shows women have equal inheritance among men, but it does not show that at all. The first thing to notice is that if Tzalafchad did have even a single son, then none of his daughters would have gotten any inheritance, right? Because his name would have continued, right? The claim here is, why should our father's name diminish among his clan, right? Well, if the father had even son, then all of the father's land inheritance would have gone on to that one son, and then that son could have passed it on to his son, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not like, if he had one son, then there would have been 5 daughters and 1 son, so each would have gotten 1/6 of the land. No, the son would have gotten all of the land, 100% of the land, and the 5 daughters of Tzalafchad would not have gotten any of the land, right? So it's not quite as feminist a situation as the revisionists like to say. Okay, so the claim here is not about themselves, that they as women deserve an equal portion of the land. That's not their claim at all. Their claim is about their father, that their father's name is not going to pass on through land inheritance because he didn't have any sons. Okay, so that's the first thing to point out. Okay, that land would have gone to the uncles instead of to any potential son that the father might have had but did not have. Okay. So now Moshe takes their plea to the Lord, to Yahweh. The implications here for Karaism are immense. Okay, so we see that there's a hierarchical systems clearly set up in the Torah. This is already mentioned when Jethro in Exodus, I'm going to go with 17, gives Moshe advice that he should set up a hierarchical court system, and that Moshe should be the one who stands before God with all of the hardest cases. In other words, that Moshe brings the hardest cases to God if he can't solve them himself. And here we see the application of exactly that which Jethro with that which Jethro recommended, and then Moshe fulfilled back before Sinai, right? And that's exactly what's happening here. Moshe obviously feels he can't. This is a too difficult case for him to solve himself, and so he brings it directly to God. But we see here an application in practice application of the hierarchical court system of ancient Israel. Okay, that there was a hierarchy. There were lower judges, higher judges, and at the top was the leader of Israel, the judge. Right? When we talk about the book of Judges and we talk about the various judges, there was always a single judge leading Israel at a given time. One of them was Torah. So that's a much more feminist story in a sense than the daughters of Tzalafchad, right? So the judge was generally a prophet, right? Once kings were appointed, then the kings were no longer prophets because kings were lower status than judges, right? It's a whole big long story, but the king was kind of an earthly representation of a leader, where a judge was kind of a prophet slash leader who fulfilled the role also that a king would fulfill, such as leading the people out to war, etc. But a king was when kings were appointed, when Israel demanded a king from Samuel, and the system switched over from judges to kings, then the kings no longer had prophecy. But the judges before then, they had to rely on prophets like Moshe, like David had to rely on Nathan. Shaul had to rely on Samuel, etc. Yes, if someone wants to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say, going to ask. This presents a little bit of a complicated thing with the daughters of Zalaf. These daughters, when they married and when they had children, that husband then, did he have to join their section? And the children that they had with that child received the inheritance of their father? I mean, if the daughters now have a piece of land, are they given two portions, one for the husband and one for the daughter? And then who did that land pass on to? Does it go to the daughter's son? Because the father to the son.
Does it go to the husband?
Well, that would be the question. But if the daughters clearly got land, it doesn't go to the husband. So did the husband have to join their tribe? I mean, their lineage? It makes it pretty complicated.
That's true, and it's so complicated that's exactly what the tribe of Manasseh comes and says, or again queries Moshe regarding this very issue. So that's in Numbers 36. To make a long story short, one second. So representatives from the tribe of Manasseh say, we're not going to go through Numbers 36 now, but when we get to it, we'll see. Representatives in the tribe of Manasseh come to Moshe and they say, listen, if the daughters of Tzalafchad inherit the land, and then they marry outside of the tribe of Manasseh, then our land inheritance is going to go to a different tribe, because it's going to go at that point through the son, right? Through the sons of that marriage, and the sons of that marriage would belong to the tribe of their father, because everything, despite what the rabbis say, and when they destroy the Torah by turning it on its ear, inheritance goes through the father, and belonging to a tribe goes through the father, and of course belonging to Israel goes through the father. So let's say one of the daughters of Tzalafchad, let's take the first one, let's say Machla, were to marry who's the daughter of Tzalafchad, who's from the tribe of Manasseh. Let's say Machla were to marry someone from the tribe of Dan. Okay, now and let's say they're the son. We'll call him, I don't know, Chuck. Okay, so they have a son named Chuck. Chuck is now a Danite. He's from the tribe of Dan because his father was a Danite, And so now being the son of Tzalafchad and this person from the tribe of Dan, so the inheritance would pass from the inheritance that Tzalafchad was that Machla, this daughter of Tzalafchad, was holding on to, would now pass to the son of the Danite, to Chuck, who's a Danite, and now that land would belong to the tribe of Dan. And that's exactly what the tribe of representatives from the tribe of Menashe come to Moshe with in Numbers 36. And then Moshe again asks God, and the resolution is that the daughters of Tzalafchad must marry within their own tribe. They have to marry within the tribe of Menashe so that the inheritance stays within the tribe of Menashe. That's it.
But a question about that is, within the tribe and within the land of the tribe, wasn't each father or each family had their own portion as well? So did it just kind of get lost within the tribal inheritance? I mean, so the guy that marries the girl, his land, I don't know how they divided it up, but it's obviously tribal land.
Divided up by lots. That's explicit. In fact, they speak about drawing the lots in Joshua, very explicitly. But yeah, I hear your question, and it would stay within the same tribe, but yeah, it would now transfer over to the husband's descendants. So if Tzalafchad owned, let's say, Machla owned, I don't know, let's take a neighborhood in Jerusalem. If Machla owned, I don't know, Bnei Brak is not it. We'll go with Bnei Brak. If Machla owned Bnei Brak, and she marries someone from the tribe of, I guess Menashe. I don't know if they own Bnei Brak. I'm just making it up. And she married someone from the tribe of Menashe who owned, I don't know. Let's go with, I don't know, Me'asharim. Now their sons would split both Bnei Brak and Me'asharim. Not that anyone would want any of those places.
Right. So they would be getting a double inheritance.
Yeah, it's a completely strange situation, because what's going to happen with this leftover land, right? Tzalafchad didn't have any sons to give the land to. The land's got to go somewhere, so it would have gone to the uncles, but instead now it's going to go to Tzalafchad's grandsons. That's basically what's going to happen.
That's right. Okay.
Right? So
makes sense.
Right. So it kind of preserves. If Tzalafchad had sons, it would have gone to his grandsons, but he didn't have sons, and so now it's still going to go to his grandsons, but it's not going to go directly through the patrilineal line. So yes, it's going to transfer over to another clan. Hold on a second. I hear cat hacking. 1 second. Oh, sorry. Where's two? Okay, because I heard a cat screeching. I thought it was two. Then sit here. You have a big fan right here, or take the big fan in the back. Okay, so it's still gonna. So yes, it's gonna transfer over to a different clan, but it still will stay in the same tribe, and that's the way it's resolved in the end, right? And it still will go. That land still will go to the grandsons of Tzalafchad. It will just be for one generation through the matrilineal line rather than through the patrilineal line. That's basically the resolution, right? So I guess, God's resolution is, okay, it still stays within the tribe, number one, and it still goes to the descendants of Tzalafchad, just not through the male line, because he doesn't have a male line. He only has a female line. So it's still going to his descendants, right? Only to his descendants. So even though it may belong to another clan, officially, that clan is all of the people who will get that inheritance are still his descendants, right? They may belong to another clan, but they're still his descendants through the female line. So it stays with his descendants, right? So I guess let's move on. Okay. What is Sufi yelling about? Why don't you put her outside if she's going to screech like that? Okay. just gonna put her outside. Excuse me for 1 second. Here you go. Why don't you give me the snacks? All right. Go. All right. So, Moed, okay, right. Okay, Yomer Yahweh Moshe. Okay, so here we were, right? Verse 6, Yomer Yahweh Moshe Lemor. So God responds to Moshe, okay? Ken Benot Salafchad. So this is, I think this may be the, I don't know if it's the only place, but not modern Hebrew, we know there's yes and there's no. Yes is Ken, which you will not hear very often from Israelis, and no is lo, which you will hear very often from Israelis. So you may know the word lo, but you may not know the word Cain. No, that's just a joke. At any rate, but Cain does not mean yes in ancient Hebrew. There was no word for yes in ancient Hebrew. When ancient Hebrew wanted to say yes, they would just reaffirm the statement. So, are you feeling well? I am feeling well. Okay. Do you want to eat falafel? I want to eat falafel. There was no word for yes. Okay. But modern Hebrew, and I'm not sure exactly when, Hebrew went through so many changes over the years, so I'm not sure when it was adopted. But of course, by the time we get to modern Hebrew, then we know Ken represents yes. But Ken does not really mean yes in ancient Hebrew. It means so, or thus, or right, or correct, right? And here we have a lot of examples. I mean, a lot of examples. But you'll never see it representing the word yes. Okay. And usually it's not even standalone. It's here we have lachen, acharechen. Here we have an example. Okay. Ken asa. This is speaking about Noah. So he did. All right. So maybe a better translation of Ken would be thus or so. Okay. But if you look at most of them, al Ken, yomru Ken ta'aseh, al Ken. So most of the time it's as such or after such, etc. Okay. But here, if you didn't know ancient Hebrew, it would almost seem like it means yes, right? Ken banot salafchad dobrot, right? But really, what it means is in this context, it means thus or so. It means correct, right? Let's just look at the BDB for a second. Here we go. Right. Usually indeclinable, often as a substantive, a right thing, especially with a, I don't even know what that means. Ken dibata, ken dovrot, ken ya'arichu, ya'arich. Okay, so ken means correctly or right. Okay, but it doesn't mean yes, and that's the context here. Ken benot salafat dovrot. Right, so it's not. The answer is not yes, daughters of Tzalafchad. It's so or correctly the daughters of Tzalafchad have spoken. Okay, ken dovrot, correctly they are speaking or spoke. Okay. Ken benot naton titen lahem ahuzat nachalat betoch achei avihem. Okay, certainly you shall give to them an inheritance or a portion of their inheritance within the brothers of their father. And you shall transfer the inheritance of their father to them. Okay, so God is saying yes, they're correct, right? They've spoken correctly. Their petition is recognized as correct. Again, the implications here are really vast, because why wasn't this given as part of the original Torah? Why did the daughters of Tzalafchad have to come, and then God had to add a law, in a certain sense, to the Torah, right? Does this mean that there's such a thing as an oral law? Isn't this, in a sense, in addition to the Torah? Isn't this a kind of oral law, right? Yes, you could say it is an oral law, except there's one big difference. It's an oral law that's handed down by God. It's not an oral law that's made up by the rabbis, right? So if God wants to hand down an oral law, that's, I would say, okay, since he's making the laws in the first place. Okay, if a rabbi, Tarfon wants to add law to the Torah, I would say that's not okay. So, but we could sit here and we could discuss the theological and political implications of this petition that the daughters of Tzalachad bring probably for hours, but we won't. Okay. Ve'im eno bat v'natata nahalato oops, where were we? Vatam et nahala levito. Ve'im en lo bat v'natata et nahalato le'achiv. So now God is saying, but if he doesn't have any daughters, meaning if Tzalachad had been childless completely, he didn't have any sons or any daughters, then his inheritance should be given to his brothers. Okay, so this is very similar to there's a common idea throughout the Tanakh of the Goel. Okay, we know about the Goel Adam. It's mentioned explicitly in the Torah. No, it's in Deuteronomy, right? Or is it? I can't remember where it is. A second. No, it might be in Exodus. I can't remember. At any rate, so so there's this idea of the next of kin, or of the redeemer. We see it also in the book of Ruth. Okay, so when Boaz wants to marry Ruth, so Ruth was the former wife of, was it Machlon or Kilion? I believe Machlon. At any rate, one of the daughters of Naomi, right? So and she was a Moabite, as we all know, and the husbands were Israelites, right? So they, as Israelites, I think it was Machlon. I won't look it up now, but let's say Ruth was the wife of. No, I have to look it up. I can't leave it unlooked up. Let's just look it up for a second. Ruth. Okay. Two sons married. So it was the book of Ruth. Two sons married Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth. So I guess Machlon and Chilion are mentioned in that order, and then Orpah and Ruth are mentioned in that order. So I guess Ruth was married to Chilion. Let's just check for 1 second. Yeah, no, Machlon married the Moabite convert Ruth, and that's explicit in Ruth 4:10. Okay. Just look at that for 1 second. So Ruth 4:10. Ruth. Where did you go? One of my favorite books in the Torah is the Book of Ruth. It's like, I get shivers every time I read it. I really do. It's just it's one of those stories that really just like hits really deep. But now I can't find it. Isaiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel.
It's right after Joshua judges Ruth.
Okay. That makes sense. There we go. So it was Ruth 4:1. Was it 1:4? Must have been 1:4. 1. להם נשאי מוביות שם אחד אורפה ושם השני רות וישבו שם וימותו גם שניהם מחלון וקניון. Okay, I don't know. I can't find it right now. Okay, so we'll go with Machlon. Okay, so right. So yes. So Boaz wants to marry Ruth, but before Boaz can marry Ruth, he goes to the city gate, basically the center of town, and he finds out that he has to ask first if there's another redeemer, if there's someone who's closer in kin who could take over the inheritance, who would like to take over the inheritance of Machlon, okay? And if someone closer in kin than Boaz wants to take over the inheritance of Machlon, then he has the right to take the inheritance as well. And the Goel, the next of kin, the redeemer, is the way it's usually translated, is interested until he finds out that also it means inheriting Ruth. So Ruth was basically considered part of Machlon's estate, right? And once he finds that out, he says, no, it's gonna diminish my own family if I inherit Ruth. So I forfeit my privilege of taking the inheritance of Machlon. And so then Boaz, being the next of kin, is then allowed to take the inheritance of Machlon, and that's how he ends up marrying Ruth. He basically takes Ruth as an inheritance, as part of the estate of Machlon. And it's completely, that's spoken about, I won't say extensively, but pretty explicitly in the book of Ruth. So we have this idea of, the next of kin, like closer kin, and then farther away kin, etc. And that's exactly what is being said here. So if a man has daughters, then that now can be considered the next of kin. The daughters can be considered the next of kin for inheritance purposes. And if he has no daughters, then the next of kin is not his children. The next of kin would be his brothers. His brothers would take his inheritance. And that's exactly what verse 9 is saying, okay? That if there are no children whatsoever, then the brothers take the inheritance. Okay, verse 10. And if he doesn't have brothers, right, then it goes to his uncles, his father's brothers. Okay, so basically we're getting kind of a hierarchy of inheritance, or kind of a, shall we say, what's the word I'm looking for? A order of succession, right? Just like you have in the United States. If the President Biden dies, not that we would possibly wish anything like that upon him, wink, wink, then the vice president takes over, and the vice president dies, and Nancy Pelosi takes over, and then we all jump into the ocean. Okay, at any rate, politics aside, so it's the same thing here. An order of succession is basically being laid out for the inheritance, for the land inheritance. If there are sons, if there's even one son, then that son gets the entire inheritance. If there are any sons, they get the entire inheritance. If there aren't, then the next in line is the daughters. If there are no sons or daughters, then the brothers. And if there are no brothers, then the father's brothers, right? So basically what's happening here, we look at it, so the only thing that's changed here is we would have thought before that, okay, first the sons, second the brothers, third the father's brothers. So the daughters are being inserted in between what we would have thought would be place 1 and place 2, right? So in between sons and brothers, now daughters are inserted. And that's basically the outcome of this petition that the daughters of Tzalafchad bring to Moshe, who brings it to God, right? So it's basically inserting another point, another node within this line of inheritance succession. That's basically bottom line what's going on here, right? So the daughters are now in place 2 after the sons. Okay, the im in achim la'aviv natatem et nachla le'she'aro hakarov elav. So, and if his father doesn't have brothers, right? So we have now sons, place 1, daughters, place 2, brothers, place 3, father's brothers, place 4. If his father doesn't have brothers, then we just get a general statement. Basically to his near kin, whatever that means. So it's all
so in the case, Melech, In the case of Ruth, then, I've always thought, why is Naomi now saved by the marriage of Ruth because she's now established an inheritance for that lineage? Is that right? Because Naomi, Boaz is her savior because now she has something.
In a sense, yeah, because now Naomi, well, she's not going to have biological offspring because her biological offspring both died. That was Machlon and Kilion, right? But Ruth is basically still part of her family through marriage. So when Ruth gives birth, and that child is in a sense going to be like Naomi's continuation, because Ruth is like an adopted daughter, you could say, in a sense.
Right. That's what I'm getting from the study today. That she now has hope that there's some kind of a future with the birth,
and that's why it says in the end.
Obed, yeah.
Right, and that's why it says in the end of the book of Ruth, I can't remember the exact phrase, but it says, will the people now say that Naomi is suckling a young baby? Or let's see if we can even find it. Right.
That's amazing. That's great.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's such a wonderful story. Really, I just pray. It's really one of my. All the books of the Tanakh are my favorite, but Ruth really is one of my favorites. It's just such a special thing. So here, Boaz marries Ruth. So we can just look at it in the now. We'll do it in the Hebrew. It's not too long. V'ikach Boaz et Ruth v'ti'ilo le'isha. So Boaz took Ruth and she became his wife. Yavo elea v'yiten Yahweh la herayon v'teled ben. So Boaz had relations with Ruth, and she became pregnant and gave birth. V'tomar hanashim el Naomi. And the women said regarding Naomi, Baruch Yahweh asher lo ishpit lach goel. Blessed is Yahweh, who is not cut off, ishpit, from the same word as Shabbat, right? Who is not halted from you or ceased from you, a redeemer. There's the word goel. Okay. Hayom o yikra shemo uyikare shemo b'Yisrael. And his name shall be called in Israel. So they're talking about 1 second. Okay, so right. So they're talking about Ruth's son is going to be, I think, if I get what's happened here, the Goel, the redeemer for Naomi, is going to be Ruth's son. Okay. And his name shall be called in Israel. That means he's basically among the official members. He's in the list of Israelites. And again, we're talking here about, this is going to be Boaz's son, Oved. V'haya lach lemeshiv nefesh ulekakel et sevatech. And there will be someone, speaking again about Ruth's baby, there will be someone to restore your soul and to take care of you in your old age. Because your daughter-in-law who loves you, Yaladatu asher hi tova lach mishiva banim. She's the child that she's given birth to is better than 7 sons. Watikach Naomi et hayeled, and Naomi took the child. What tishdehu becheka, and put him down in her bosom. Vaitilo leomenet, and she was to him a nurse. I don't know if it's implying a wet nurse. It couldn't, I guess, because Naomi is obviously past childbearing years at this point, but like a caretaker, a nanny, I guess you could say. Okay, a grandmother, a nurse. Watikrana lo watikrena lo hashchenot shem lemor yulad ben leNaomi, and the women neighbors called him by a name, Lemor Yulad ben Naomi, or called out saying that a son has been born to Naomi. Oved, and they called his name Oved, Hu Avi Yishai Avi David, and he is the father of Yishai, the father of David, right? And then it goes into the line of David. But so basically what it's saying regarding Naomi is, so I don't think there was any close relationship between Naomi and Boaz. I'm trying to remember now. I don't think so. Wait a second. It must have been, right? Because how did Naomi and Boaz have any connection whatsoever? 1 second here. Let's go back for 1 second. Naomi instructs Ruth. Kishmanot, Tablach, Fatano, Boaz. Yeah, so it does say here in Ruth 3:2. So this is when they come back to Israel. So Ruth meets Boaz. No, so let's even go back before. Naomi moda leisha ishki borchaya mimishpachat Elimelech u'shmo Boaz. Okay, so here this is the relationship. So Naomi had a moda, is usually just understood as a relative. It doesn't specify what the relative is, but moda comes from the word yada, right? So basically like an acquaintance or a relative is the way it's translated from the word yada, to know, right? So a relative, leisha, to her husband. Okay, her husband was Elimelech, and so Elimelech had a relative named Boaz. So that's the relationship. So again, Naomi is not related to Boaz. Naomi's husband Elimelech was related to Boaz. Okay, so Ruth, El Naomi, and Hanan. Okay, so that's it. That's the first time that Boaz is mentioned, I think. Right. Yeah. So that's the only relationship. So it was a relative of her since deceased husband Elimelech. So Elimelech had died. That's why they went to Moab in the first place. That's why Naomi took her two daughters. Her two sons, Machlon and Kilion, to Moab in the first place. And so basically, there's no kin relationship. I mean, obviously, all of Israel, if you go back far enough, they're going to be related, but there's no close kinship between Naomi and Boaz. So the relationship is that Ruth, basically, when she made her statement, when she refused to go back to Moab, remember Orpah went back to Moab, and then Ruth makes the famous statement in 1:16, right? Where is it? Here it is. Ki el asher tilchi elech. Where you go, I shall go. Ubasher talini alin, and where you sleep, I will sleep. Ameh chami, your people are my people. Ve'elohayech Elohai, and your God is my God. That's it. I mean, she's sure. Ruth is. She knows exactly what she wants to do, right? Orpah was like, see you later, but Ruth is like very clear on what she wants to do. And in a sense, at this point, this is where Ruth cements her position as Naomi's daughter, as Naomi's adopted daughter, right? So the whole thing is, it's not by blood. Ruth is a Moabite, okay? And Naomi is not related in any close way to Boaz, right? It was her husband, Elimelech, who's some kind of distant relative of Boaz. So the whole thing is really that Ruth, when she decides to go stick with Naomi and leave her own people, right? She's now going away from her family. So Ruth basically becomes Naomi's kind of daughter, right? She's basically saying here, you are now my mother, and I am now your daughter, right? It's kind of what she's saying here. Wherever you go, I'm going, right? So then the whole connection that Naomi is going to have to the child that's born to Boaz and Ruth is through this connection that Naomi has with Ruth. That Ruth is essentially like a daughter, is essentially a daughter to a Naomi. I guess again the implications for adoption. If you have an adopted son, if you have an adopted daughter, these verses would imply that they're basically are as close, maybe even closer sometimes than someone who's your blood children, right? So obviously the relationship between Naomi and Ruth is so close that Naomi, Ruth, and all of the women in the town consider that Naomi is having a child when it's Ruth, who is no blood relationship, is not even an Israelite, and Boaz, who is not even a distant relative of Naomi except through marriage. When they have a child, it's almost like Naomi having a child, right? Which is exactly what is mentioned here in chapter 4. So, yeah.
And of course, this shoots in the foot the rabbinical lineage of it passing through the mother.
The entire Torah shoots, the entire Tanakh shoots in the foot the rabbinical.
Well, of course it does, but this is a very good example of it, shall we say? Then
absolutely. It goes without saying that if it goes by the mother, but of course, if you go to a rabbi, you already know what they're going to say. They can say, "Oh, well, when Ruth converted, so she was now a Jew," right? That statement in Ruth 1:16 is basically that's conversion. But the fact of the matter is, and I just read this somewhere else. Now I have to remember where it was. Someone completely independently wrote the same thing or mentioned the same thing. Oh God, I'd have to remember what it was. But I was reading an article or part of a book. I can't remember it. And exactly the same thing was mentioned. But I've realized this for a while now that there's no such thing for a woman as quote unquote conversion. Okay, there's no such thing for a man as conversion. The idea of conversion didn't exist in ancient Israel. There was an idea of becoming a ger, as becoming part of the nation of Israel, and that was done through circumcision, okay, and through basically coming to live in the land of Israel and circumcising yourself and your family. That's how you became a ger as a male. As a female, there's they ain't nothing there to circumcise unless you're a Muslim living in Somalia or something like that. But so obviously circumcision doesn't apply to a woman. So the way a woman became part of Israel is again, she would have to come live in the land of Israel because that's where Israel was. They weren't in Turkey and Arizona and all of these places. So you'd have to come live among Israel. But then you married an Israelite. That's how a woman became an Israelite. So I always
interesting. That's very interesting. No, I'd never thought of that before in that way.
Yeah, there's no, you will not find anywhere any sense of this same idea of conversion that you will find for a male. For a male, it's clear in many places. You circumcise, okay, then you can bring the Passover offering, then you can do a bunch of things, right? That's the way you become part of Israel. You circumcise, okay, and obviously you live among Israel, right? For a woman, you marry an Israelite. You marry into the nation of Israel. So I always like to say, and this is a big misnomer. So even the Karaites love to say that this is the way Ruth converted, by making this statement. And when they go through their, like when the Karaites in California, when they go through their conversion ceremony, they will make people, whether they're male or female, they recite this verse, right? This one here, Ki right? Where you go, I shall go. Where you sleep, I shall sleep. Your people are my people, and your God is my God. And that's wonderful. It's a beautiful statement, and it definitely shows intention. But in the case of a male, that obviously must be accompanied by circumcision. In the case of a female, it's the same thing. This is not. Ruth does not convert with this statement. Ruth merely states her intention to be part of the nation of Israel. When does she convert? When does she actually become an Israelite? She becomes an Israelite when Boaz marries her. That's when she officially becomes an Israelite. Until then, She's
That's
basically
incredible.
yeah. So that this is a statement of intention, and then God, because she's a righteous woman, and because her intentions are so clear, and because she's doing such a kindness to her mother-in-law Naomi, or whatever reasons God had, then God fulfills her desire. God fulfills her statement. This is what she wants, and then God makes it come true by arranging it so that the Goel, the nearest redeemer, does not want the inheritance of Machlon. So Boaz can end up taking the inheritance of Machlon, and in doing so, is able to basically inherits Ruth as a wife, marries Ruth, right? And that's when she becomes.
But Melech,
Yeah.
she had already married an Israelite to begin with, but of course he was living in Moab. So Machlon, did she become a convert then? When she married into that family, was she already considered a convert?
Okay, yeah, you could say that. Yes, that at that point she became an Israelite, but so there's kind of an idea in the Tanakh, and we see it a number of times. Okay, that if and I'll point to one very explicit mitzvah. If a woman does not have children, and then she's divorced by her husband, or her husband dies, then she goes back to her original status. So she was an Israelite at the time that she was married to Machlon, but because they didn't have children, once Machlon died, she was really no longer an Israelite. Okay, and
So,
my proof for that.
then she made the choice. She made the choice to follow Naomi, and then when she went to the land of Israel, she actually became permanent in the status. Okay.
Once she married Boaz, she was now an Israelite again, you could say. And then once she had a child, that's it. Now she was cemented. Once she had a male child, then she's now cemented as an Israelite. And my proof for that is, if I could just find it for a second, if order of returns to her father's house. So this is one of the most.
Sorry, Malik. One further question. This is fascinating for me. If she'd have had a female child only, what would the situation there have been then?
Well, she would still be an Israelite, okay? But wait, 1 second. Let me just go to Leviticus 22, and I think that'll clear up a lot of things. Let's see here. Let's do it this way. Oops. Here, 1 second. Doesn't make sense. It doesn't look like it is. Oops. Let me try it one more time. Is married. She's sent back. Okay, so my mistake. Here it's going to say no child. So I guess a son or a daughter, it wouldn't make a difference. It would be a son or a daughter. Okay, so let's just look here. Leviticus 22:12. Here it is. Okay, right. Okay. Okay, we're going to look at this. So this is Leviticus 22:12. Bat Kohen ki tieh leish. So the daughter of a Kohen who marries a man who's married to a man, leish zar, to literally means a foreign man, but in the context of the priesthood, zar always means a non-Kohen. So it's speaking about the daughter of a Kohen who marries someone who's not a Kohen, right? The daughters of Kohen are allowed to marry whoever they want. They don't have to marry other Kohanim. So she marries an Israelite who's not a Kohen. Okay. Leish zar. At that point, she is not allowed to eat the truma, the donations of the holy food, right? So So certain foods are given to the Levites and the Kohanim to eat, especially to the Kohanim, right? And she is now no longer allowed to eat the holy foods if she marries someone who's not a Kohen, right? So what does that mean? Well, let's read to the end. Okay, verse 13. Ubat Kohen kiti ela almana ugrusha, but the daughter of a Kohen who is a widow or who is divorced, okay, meaning she married someone who's not a Kohen, and now she's widowed or divorced, v'zera ena, and she has no descendants, she has no children. And there it would, well, you could make a case that means a male, because zera means seed, and that often refers to a male, but let's go with either. So we'll say a son or a daughter because that's the way it's translated. So has no child, v'zera ena, v'shava el beit aviha. When she returns, or she will return to her father's house, kini ureha, as it was when she was a child. Milechem avia tochel. So now she's allowed to eat her father's food. Okay, meaning she's allowed to eat the holy stuff again. Okay, v'chozar lo yochal bo. But anyone who's not a Kohen is not allowed to eat from it. So basically what this is saying is that if the daughter of a Kohen, so when the daughter of a Kohen is growing up in her father's house, she's allowed to eat the holy foods because she's part of his household. Okay, he's a Kohen, he eats the holy foods as a Kohen, and so his children are allowed to eat the holy foods. It's not even a question for sons, because the sons are Kohanim by inheritance, right? The son of a Kohen is a Kohen. But the question is, are the daughters allowed to eat the holy food? So yes, they're allowed to eat the holy food that are set aside for the Kohanim before they're married, while they're living in their father's house. Now, it says here that if she gets married to someone who's not a Kohen, she's no longer allowed to eat the holy foods, right? Because she's now part of her husband's household. So let's say her husband is from the tribe of Asher. He's not a Kohen. He's not allowed, her husband is not allowed to eat the holy food set aside for the Kohanim. So she is now part of that household when she's married. She is not allowed to eat the holy foods anymore. She's not part of her father's household now. She's part of her husband's household. However, if her husband dies or divorces her, v'zera ena, and she never had a child, okay, again, you can make a case for this meaning just a son, but let's go with the less restricted meaning of a child, and she's never had a child, meaning a child is considered the cementing of the marriage, right? So if that's the expression, right? That's the expression of the union, right? Because the child inherits both DNA of the mother and the father. So that's like the consummation or the expression of the union of marriage. So if she becomes a widow or is divorced from this person who is not a Kohen, and she doesn't have any child, then she returns to her father's house, okay, and she's allowed to eat her father's food as she did when she was a child, meaning she's allowed once again to eat the holy foods that are set aside for the Kohanim, okay? And that's only in the case, so now she's back in her father's house, but since she didn't have a child, it's like she's going back to point zero, to stage zero. She's back in her father's house, living as if she were, a child back in her father's house. Not a pleasant situation, but that's a situation that's being spoken about, okay? So there's but if she did have a child, yeah.
Sorry, there's one more thing that might play into this.
Yeah, go ahead.
When the daughter marries out, the Kohanim are not allowed to, celebrate the grave? I mean the death. A daughter that's unmarried and dies, they are allowed to defile themselves for the death of this daughter or son, whatever. But the daughter, especially if she marries outside the family, no longer is there any responsibility to defile themselves for that daughter.
Right. So in general, the general rule in the Tanakh, and you could see this throughout the entire Tanakh without any exceptions, is a woman attains the status of whatever household she belongs to. A woman always belongs to a household, unless she's a situation like, even Ruth belonged to a. But when Ruth first came to Israel, she didn't really belong to a household, okay? But a woman, typically, okay, when she's a child, she belongs to her father's household. Then she gets married, now she belongs to her husband's household. So whatever the association, whatever the rules are for the father's household, when she's a child, those rules apply to her. When she gets married, whatever the rules are and whatever the association is for the husband's household, that now applies to her. So if she is a child, if her father is from the tribe of Asher, then as a child, she is a member of the tribe of Asher for all intents and purposes. And then she gets married to someone from the tribe of Ephraim. Now she becomes basically part of the tribe of Ephraim. Okay, she attains the status of the household that she belongs to. And in ancient Israel, women, with rare exceptions, Ruth is actually an exception until she's taken by Boaz. Women always belonged to, but that's a special case because she's not an Israelite by birth, right? A woman always belongs to a household and therefore acquires the status of that household. Okay, so that's what's being spoken about here, right? So let's say this Cohen's daughter gets married, has children, and then her husband dies. She doesn't go back to the status of Cohen, okay? Because she has children, that's now her family. That's now her new association. And she will keep the association of whatever tribe she married into. So if she's the daughter of a Cohen and marries into the tribe of Dan, has 3 kids, and then her husband dies, God forbid, then she's now still a Danite because she has a family within the tribe of Dan. Those are her children, right? So that's kind of the way I understand that it works, and it's very, very consistent throughout the Torah that the woman acquires the status of the household that she belongs to, right? But the interesting thing here is if she doesn't have children and now she doesn't have a husband, she has nothing. It's like she's back to point zero. She's just a single point without any belonging at this point. So then she goes back, in the case of the Cohen's daughter, then she goes back to being as she was as a child in her father's house, right? Because women in ancient Israel didn't exist alone. They existed within the context of a household, right? They didn't for the most part. I'm sure there were some exceptions here and there, but they didn't, like take an apartment and start working at a bank or something like that, right? So they always belonged to one household or another, either to their father's household or to their husband's household or to their children's household, right? And we see this despite feminism in this day and age. We still see this, right? A daughter is, basically connected to her father until she marries, and then she's connected to her husband, and then if the husband dies, then she generally is connected to her children. I mean, I know, many older people who, let's say, older women who their husbands die, and then they go move in with the children, or they move near the children, right? Because that's now their clan, that's now their family, is their children, right? So this is all. That's not coming from nowhere. This is the natural way that people lived, right? And so it's being expressed in the book of Ruth. So okay, so to unravel, so in the case of Ruth, so how do we even get onto this? We said that Ruth was acquired, right? So we're talking about redeemers. So the closest of kin did not want to redeem Machlon's inheritance because it would have meant taking Ruth as well. So then Boaz was allowed to. He was the next in kin, the next closest kin. So he took Machlon's inheritance, and that included Ruth. So now he was married to Ruth. And so to get back to numbers, so before we get back to where we were, any final questions or comments about this? And Wolfgang says, how many years did Ruth go through to get her conversion? Was a Hasidic Sephardim one, Ashkenazi conversion? Was it Yemenite, Mizrahi maybe? Probably Yemenite, because that's where they were closest. All right. So, So let's get back to numbers. So how do we get onto this? We were talking about the daughters of Tzalafchad. So the daughters of Tzalafchad. So now we're talking about, we have the inheritance line, right? The different order of succession for inheritance, and that's how we got onto this. So basically, the bottom line of the daughters of Tzalafchad's petition to Moshe and to God was that the daughters are now inserted as place 2 in the line of inheritance. Okay, and let's go to let's see, where were we? Right. So then it's just a summary sentence there. So this now became, well, this is an interesting summary sentence. והייתה לבני ישראל לחוקת משפט את משה. And now, became, or this now becomes, where this now becomes a lot of judgment. Israel as Yahweh. Implications of this are huge. Think about think about the oral law. So this now this became a law. It wasn't a law before, but this now became a law. So this is a clear example of an addition to the previous set of laws, right? This law was not there before. Now it's here now, and now it's an eternal statute. It's a statute for all of Israel from here on in, right? So this is an addition to the law, but it's an addition to the law. It's, you can call it quote unquote an oral law, even though it's written down, right? But it's an addition to the original law of the Torah, but it's going through the proper channels, right? It's going up, it's being run up the hierarchy, right? First to Moshe. Moshe can't figure it out on his own, so he goes straight to God. God gives him the answer. Moshe passes it back down to Israel. That's the proper hierarchy, okay? If all of the oral law of the rabbis were done that way, then none of us could sit here and say a thing. But of course, it wasn't done that way. It was made up through their own imagination, and then they basically claimed. I mean, this is what I'm sorry to say. This is what liars they are, because they are basically claiming this. They are claiming that they ran it up the flagpole all the way up to God, and it came back down, and that's how the oral law came about. That's exactly what the rabbis are claiming. They are taking this verse and saying that's how we got our own oral law. And by doing that, they are lying. They're doing more than lying. They're false prophets, the rabbis, because they are pretending that their oral law came from God when it did not come from God. It came from nowhere. And we know that the punishment in the Torah for a false prophet is that the false prophets are put to death. The rabbis, every single last one of them is by definition a false prophet, because they claim that their oral law is coming from God, and they're making that up out of they're just sucking it out of their finger. It's not based in reality. So they are essentially false prophets. Okay. Do I think we should go around and hang all the rabbis? Not until we have a true Torah government in place. I wouldn't recommend it at this point in time, but that day may come. Who knows? At any rate, so that's the story, and that's really how serious the offense of the rabbis is. It's not that they're just saying, "Oh, our oral law comes from God and it came from Moshe at Sinai." They're claiming false prophecy. They're saying that their oral law comes from prophecy. They may say it doesn't come directly. They may say, "Oh, Moshe taught." You'll hear a lot of rabbis say, "Oh, God taught Moshe how to interpret that through the various midot, the 13 midot, or the 39 midot, Gezerah Shavah and Kal v'chomer, and all the different, there are these different methods for midrashic interpretation that the rabbis came up with, which are very clearly based on Greek methods of interpretation. There are some very brilliant articles about this. But at any rate, the rabbis are claiming that their oral law is from God. If they're claiming that their oral law comes from God, then they're saying it's based on prophecy. And if they're saying it's based on prophecy and it's not based on prophecy, then they are false prophets. And that's exactly what the rabbis are. They're liars and they're false prophets. Okay? Simple as that. Okay. Any questions, any comments before we I'll go to the end of this chapter, and then I'm going to have to end it because it's kind of getting late here. Okay. Verse 12. Yomer Yahweh al Moshe, alei el har ha'avarim hazeh. So it's the name of a mountain. Ve'ur'e et ha'aretz asher natati. Now, avarim, we could analyze that, but avarim really means, I guess, me'ever yaden, avarim. So avarim, avar means across from or to cross, right? Avraham Ivri, some people say that the name means from across the river. So Hara Avarim might mean the mountain that's across from the land of Israel. Because remember, they're me'ever yaden, they're on the other side, they're across from the Jordan in the plains of Moab. That's where basically all of the book of Deuteronomy takes place. And look at the land which I've given to the children of Israel. And you will see it, and then you'll be gathered to your people, meaning you'll die. you too, just as your brother was gathered to his people, meaning just as your brother Aaron died, you will also die. Okay. Kasher meritem pi bamidbar sin mirivat ha'ida lahaqtisheni b'mayim la'aynehem him me mirivat kadesh in Bartzil. As you rebelled against my instructions, or rebelled against me in the desert of Tzin, the Miribat Ha'ida, when the entire congregation, when the entire, we're going with Edah, we're translating as witnessing congregation, right? I said translations. Edah, witnessing community. Okay, from the word Eid, which means witness. So just as the entire witnessing community, congregations to translate it is, Baktisheni, so you refuse to sanctify me b'mayim at those waters, la'aynehem, before their eyes. Hem me mirivat kadesh, these are the waters of miribah, me miribah, the waters of contention at Kadesh in the desert of Sin. So basically, what God is saying is, we had that whole incident where Moses struck the rock and forgot to say anything forgot to even mention God's name, and God used that as, and I will say it as an excuse to not make Moshe, to not allow Moshe to enter the land. For me, this is, and I'm not the first person to say it. I even remember some of the rabbis in yeshiva mentioning it, and I'm sure a bunch of the rabbinical commentaries, and maybe even some of the Karaite commentaries mention this, that it just seems like a really contrived reason to not let Moshe into the land. I mean, David, committed adultery and murdered Uzziah, and he was not put to death because he fought the wars of God. And here Moshe is, and that's what it says explicitly, because you fought the wars of Yahweh, you will not be put to death. Okay. Here, what did Moshe do? He didn't commit adultery. He didn't commit murder. He didn't commit any capital crime. He just forgot to mention God's name. He got a little bit upset and didn't sanctify God in front of the congregation. Now, because of that, he's going to die essentially without seeing this land that the Israelites were promised. It all seems like a contrived excuse. That's what I think, and I think God is just basically making up an excuse because he has other real reasons for not allowing Moshe into the land. Maybe he feels like this was the end of Moshe's mission. Maybe it wouldn't have been good for Moshe to lead the Israelites into the land because it's not. It would have essentially like sanctified Moshe almost as like godlike. I mean, he led them out of Egypt, led them through the desert. Now he's leading them into the land. Is there anyone but Moshe? It would have maybe made Moshe too permanent and important a figure at the head of Israel, and that's maybe not good for Israel because it would have like almost made Moshe a god or a demigod. So maybe it's almost like a polemic against idol worship, against leaders becoming like idols, or as Jesus later became to the Christians, right? So to make Moshe do all of this, the people would have maybe stopped seeing him as just a regular human being who's going to die and see him like as a god or a demigod. Maybe it would have eventually, who knows, turned Moshe into an idol. Maybe Moshe would have ended up, being like Jesus, worshipped as a god. So I think there's other reasons going on here. I think God had his other reasons for wanting Moshe to die before he entered the land, and he's using this whole thing as an excuse. And there is, one second. Yeah, there is one place. It's in Deuteronomy where Moshe basically says, I'm not going to find it now, but Moshe says, basically Moshe says to God, he asks God to let him into the land. And then Moshe says that God told him to stop speaking about this. And I even remember learning this in yeshiva, that some of the rabbinical commentaries say that not that it makes it true, but it's just an interesting idea, something that I think is that I kind of agree with, that the implication there is if Moshe had kept on nagging God, because God loved Moshe so much, he would have relented and would have let Moshe into the land. So he basically said, Moshe, let's not talk about this anymore, okay? So I think there's something else going on. It just does not seem that the punishment fits the crime in this case. And but that's the reason that God is giving for Moshe not being allowed to to enter the land. So he's gonna go up onto the mountain eventually and die. Okay, verse 15. Wayidaber Moshe. And again, I'll stop for any comments or questions. If anybody has, just join in. Oh, okay. So, Wayidaber Moshe il Yahweh lemor, and Moshe. And Moshe said to Yahweh, saying, Yifkod Yahweh Elohei haruchot lechol basar ish al ha'edah. Let Yahweh, the God of souls, of all spirits, the God of the spirits of all men, of all flesh, let him appoint a man over the congregation. Okay, I'm going to die, but Moshe is considering the good of the people, as always, and he's saying, if I'm going to die, then let someone else be appointed. Don't leave these sheep without a shepherd. Asher yitzei lifnehem, asher yavo lifnehem, who will go out before them, who will come in before them. That usually refers to war, but I guess it could refer also to well, they're going to enter the land. So it really refers in general to being their leader, but specifically to leading them out to war. In other words, to protect them, to be it speaks about David when he would go out to war before them, and it uses this phrase. Okay, Vasher yotzim, Vasher yotzi'em, Vasher yivi'em, who will bring them out and who will bring them back in. V'lo ti'eh adat Yahweh k'tzon asher en lehem ro'eh, and do not let the witnessing congregation of Yahweh be like sheep who don't have a shepherd. So Moshe, as is true to his character, is making this kind of majestic statement, right? He doesn't just say Yahweh, he says Yahweh Elohei haruchot lechol basar, Yahweh, God of the spirits of all flesh. Okay, so he's really like, he's making this kind of like not grandiose, that's the wrong word, but this very majestic kind of statement, right? He's really trying to get God's attention, right? Really like flatter God, not in a bad way, but speak to God in a way that's making it sound important and very like he has a very important statement to say. Okay. So verse 18, Vayomer Yahweh el Moshe, Kach lecha et Yoshua bin Nun, ish asher ruach bo v'samachta et yadcha alav. So take Yeshua ben Nun, Joshua, a person who has spirit in him. Okay, the Spirit of God, obviously, right? He has the Spirit of God in him, and you will lay your hands upon him, right? So here it says samachta et yadcha alav, and this is where the rabbis get the idea of smicha. Samachta smicha. So the rabbis say that when a new person becomes a rabbi, he says he gets smicha. That's what they call it. Where does it come from? It comes from this idea. So I don't know if in the ceremony they actually have another rabbi lay his hands on the head of the new rabbi, or if it just means it symbolically, but it comes from this idea that Moshe laid his hands on the head of of Joshua in order to basically transfer the power over to him. Okay? So basically Moshe is giving Yeshua smicha. And you'll stand him before Elazar the Kohen, that's the Kohen Gadol, the third son of Aaron, as we said. But if Nekola Edan, before all of the witnessing congregation, with Tzivita Oto Leinehem, and you shall command him before their eyes. In other words, you shall appoint him before their eyes. Okay, verse 20. We natata mehodcha alav, and you will give from your glory. How did they translate hod? Your authority, they translate it as. Hod is usually translated as, usually goes with hadar. So glory or majesty, I think they usually translate hod as. Let's see how Robert Alter deals with that one. So this is 27:20. Grandeur. The Hebrew word hod, grandeur, majesty, aura, is typically associated with kings or with God. The partitive mem that prefixes the noun is a clear indication of the difference in stature between Moses and Yeshua. Yeah, good point. Only a part of Moses' grandeur is to be conferred upon Joshua. In any case, this notion of leadership presumes that the leader in his personal presence must manifest some sort of charisma in order to enlist the loyalty of those he would lead, in order that the whole Israelite community will heed. Okay, so that is that. Oops. Right. So So basically Moshe is going to do this in front of the entire congregation. He's going to place his hands on Yeshua and symbolically, and not symbolically, literally transfer his glory, his majesty, his power from himself to Yeshua. And this is going to be done in front of the entire congregation. Why? Lima'an yishma'u kol adat b'nei Israel, in order that the entire witnessing congregation, witnessing community of the children of Israel will listen. Okay, listen to Yeshua, right? Basically, it would be like a teacher saying, okay, I'm going to be away for a week, but here, Mr. I don't know, Dorfman, that was one of my substitute teachers back in the day, who we liked very much. Mr. Dorfman is going to be your substitute teacher for 1 week, and he's going to administer the test that we're supposed to have next Friday. So you better listen to everything he says, and please welcome, please be kind and behave well for Mr. Dorfman. And then the teacher walks out the door, right? So, okay, you're still not going to treat your substitute teacher very well. At least we never did. But at least it's going to be better than the substitute teacher just shows up and says, I'm replacing the regular teacher and I'll be here for a week, right? So this is exactly what's happening. It's a public transfer of power from Moshe to Yeshua, and this is all done very publicly. The placing of the hands is done in front of the entire congregation, so the entire congregation can see that the power is now being transferred from Moshe to Yeshua, and that way they'll listen to Yeshua more. He's taking over from Moshe. Okay, he's the substitute teacher, the permanent replacement for Moshe. Okay. ולפני אלעזר הכהן יעמוד ושאל לו במשפט האורים לפני יהוה על פיו ייצוב על פיו יבוא הוא בכל בני ישראל איתו בכל העדה. So this is an interesting statement. So he shall stand, meaning Yeshua shall stand before Elazar the Kohen, ושאל לו במשפט האורים, and he will ask him the judgment of the Urim. Remember the Urim and Tumim. Well, nobody knows exactly what they are, but if you remember back when we studied the book of Leviticus, these were placed on the. Actually, doesn't. I don't know if it says explicitly they're placed on the breastplate. These were some kind of oracles. Okay, so I guess a lot of people think that it was 12 stones on the breastplate that you asked a question, and then that somehow whatever tribe it applied to would light up, or somehow the answer would light up. I think there were other commentaries that said it might have been a bunch of stones in a little bag that was carried around by the Kohen Gadol. At any rate, the Urim are kind of oracles. They're these. You don't ask God directly, but you ask a question. And the Kohen Gadol, who has possession of the Urim and Tumim, the Urim and Tumim somehow indicate, either by lighting up or who knows, maybe you reach into the sack and whichever you pick out, that is the answer. Nobody really knows. But at any rate, the Urim and Tumim is some kind of mechanism for getting answers from God through an indication through these inanimate objects, whatever they were. Okay, so so now Yeshua is going to be the one asking. So now it's no longer Moshe who's going to be asking of the Kohen to consult these oracles, these Urim and Tumim, but it's going to be Yeshua who's going to be doing this, again showing that Yeshua is the new leader, right? Because this is what Moshe would have done in the past. You can feed the cats, and I'll be done in about 5 to 10 minutes. Okay. Okay, and according to them, according to their statement, meaning the statement of the Urim, the results of this asking this oracle, these objects, They shall go out and al-piv yavo, they shall go out and they will come back. Again, that almost always implies war, right? So a typical question would be, shall we go out and attack the Philistines in, I don't know, Kadesh Barnea? I'm just making it up, right? And you would consult the Urim and Tumim, and you would pick out a stone, and I don't know, the yes stone would be lit up, and so now you know that you're supposed to go out, and that God will be with you when you attack the Philistines, and and according to this, you will go out to war, and according to this, you will come back to war. Okay, come back from war. In other words, you will wage war according to the results of the Urim and Tumim. That seems to be their main tafkid. How do you say tafkid in English again? Their main role, their main purpose was to determining when you should go out to war. Okay. Okay. Verse 22. So now Moshe does it. He takes Joshua Ya'amidehu Lifnei Elazar Kohen and places him or stands him up before Elazar the Kohen, or Lifnei Kol Ha'edah, before all of the entire congregation. U'yismoch et yadav alav, and he placed his hands upon him. Where, I don't know, was it on the shoulders? Was it on the head? We know with the goat that goes out to Azazel, that it's placed on the head of the goat, so maybe it's on the head, although it's not the same thing. And he commanded him, meaning Moshe commanded.
Start screaming.
I don't know. Okay, then you can't put them in here. You have to do that in the garage. You can't have this. No, I'm sorry. But then you'll have to wait. I'm sorry. Then you'll have to. You can wait another 20 minutes and calm down. Don't feed them. Okay, I'll let you know when you feed them. And you both cats will be out now. In the middle of the study, and start reading. Okay, both cats will be out. When I'm done with the study, then you'll feed them. They don't need to be fed at this moment. Okay, go. Outside. Okay, go away. I'll wrap it up when I'm ready to wrap it up. Okay, I'll wrap it up when I'm ready to wrap it up. In the meantime, the cats can wait another time. Sometimes we feed them at 11 o'clock at night. We get home, so it doesn't matter if they leave. Okay, so we'll go good. All right, stay with them. Sorry about that. Okay, so. So he rested his hands, or placed his hands upon him, and commanded him, meaning Moshe commanded Yoshua, right, saying, now you're the head, now you're going to be the one consulting the Urim and Tumim, basically telling him in front of the entire congregation, telling Yoshua what his role is, that he's now taking over. Okay. And then we get back to some more things regarding the offerings. We're not, unfortunately, going to have time to do this, but maybe we'll finish up with, let's look at some commentaries on this chapter from Robert Alter, and then we'll finish up. So let's see what he has to say about the daughters of Tzalafchad, right, which is a very, very fascinating topic, obviously. So Rashi, noting that this episode immediately follows a mention of the 10 fearful spies, construes it as a special argument in behalf of the role of women as opposed to men in the wilderness narrative. The men say, let us make us put up a head and return to Egypt, and the women say, give us a hold. Okay, well, that's Rashi. And clearly, this is Robert Alter's, bow to feminism. That's why he's quoting Rashi here. Rashi was not being a feminist, I don't think. But Robert Alter, who is a professor at a university in California, I can't remember which one, he better act like a feminist, or else he's going to get his ass fired. So there we go. That's Robert Alter giving a bow to feminism. Okay, our father died. The choice of favored narrative dialogue. Oh, we read this already, so we're not going to reread it. But let's see. I don't think we read. Wait, did we read this? Yeah, the issue of the daughter's inheritance in the absence of male offspring is not presented. Oh, we did read this. It's a holding. Okay, I don't think we read this starting here. But the notion of the daughters inheriting was exceptional in the ancient Near East. We did read this. Okay. But I'll just short. So this story is something other than a feminist argument. The chief concern is not to lose the inheritance pertaining to the clan, not to allow the name of the clan to disappear, but since holdings of the clans were defined within tribal territories, the whole system would have been upset if the daughters were to marry outside the tribe. This is answering Ariella's question. The follow-up to this episode is chapter 36. In chapter 36, therefore, it stipulates that they are obliged to marry within the tribe. Okay, we read this. Moshe brought forth their case before the Lord. This idiom refers to inquiry of an oracle, but unlike the Urim and Tumim, evidently divinatory stones or tokens that Yeshua is directed to employ at the end of this chapter, Moshe is represented as engaged in dialogue with God. So I don't think if oracle means some kind of, again, token, as they say here, then I don't agree with it. But if it just means oracle in the general sense of it as an answer, as a prophecy, then I hope that's what he's saying, because it's clearly that Moshe was speaking to God. We know that Moshe speaks to God directly. This Salafchad was not resolved through the Urim and Tumim. It was resolved directly through Moshe asking God and God speaking, giving him the answer. Okay, secure holding. The Hebrew is literally a holding of a state. The two terms achuzah and nachala are virtual synonyms. Achuzah is kind of a land holding, and nachala is an inheritance. Yeah, I can say are similar. And the use of the two synonyms linked in the construct state often expresses an intensification of the noun. Actually, that's a very good point he's making. So that's in verse 7. Just look at that for 1 second. So here we have repetition. Naton titain means you will certainly give lahem achuzat nachala. So he's saying that this is like this. Okay, we always know that in biblical Hebrew, repetition means emphasis. Repetition represents emphasis. So naton titain means you will certainly give. And then he's saying lahem achuzat nachala. So he's saying these are synonyms. And these are in what's called the construct state. To make a long story short, they're joined to each other. Okay, so so he's saying that because of synonyms, this is basically like a repetition. It would almost like saying achuzat achuzah, but usually you don't have nouns repeated. It's usually verbs that are repeated. So instead of the noun being repeated, it's a noun being repeated by a synonym, right? Which is very common in the Torah. You'll generally have even in statements that are separated, but in parallel, you'll have the nouns and sometimes even the verbs being different but synonymous with each other. So that's what he's saying. He's basically saying this is like this, naton titain, this is a repetition. Even though it's two different words, achuzat nachala, it's basically a repetition because achuzah and nachala, which both mean inheritance or land inheritance, are basically synonyms. So it's a repetition essentially. Very, very, actually, very brilliant point, I must say. Okay. All right, verse 8. Should a man die? From the dramatized instance of the daughters of Tzalachah, the divine response to Moses' inquiry now proceeds to a casuistically formulated law of inheritance that includes the contingency of a daughter as heir, but also stipulates the line of inheritance when the deceased has neither sons nor daughter. Okay, so that's what we mentioned, the line of succession for inheritance. Even though all that was asked about was the daughters, the entire line of what the response is not only that the daughters should get the inheritance if there are no sons, but the entire line of inheritance, the line of succession of inheritance, is denoted in that part of the in those verses, as we mentioned. Okay, since you rebelled against my word to sanctify me through the water, the sense. Oops. Why is this? Okay. The sense of the somewhat loose syntax of the sentence is: my instruction against which you rebelled was to sanctify me through the water, that is, by making manifest that it was I bringing forth water from the rock, rather than claiming the deed for yourself and our own as you struck the rock. Okay? But the Lord God of the spirits of all flesh appoint the man. So this is when Moshe, after God tells Moshe he's going to die, and then Moshe comes back and says, please don't let the sheep be without a shepherd. In this final dialogue between Moses and God, it is noteworthy that Moses, far from demurring, that's interesting. So this is the final dialogue between Moses and God. I wonder if that's the case. I guess there's nowhere in the book of Deuteronomy that there's an actual dialogue. That's very interesting. I didn't realize this was. We'll have to keep an eye out for that. But I think that makes sense because the book of Deuteronomy is basically a soliloquy by Moses, and we're almost at the book of Numbers, and we don't see direct dialogues that often in Torah. Wow. So that very well may be the case. In this final dialogue in the entire Torah is the implication, or ever recorded in the Tanakh. In this final dialogue between Moses and God, is noteworthy that Moses, far from demurring about the fate of imminent death that has just been pronounced upon him, expresses his concern about the continuity of leadership and the future of the people he had led. Yep, typical Moshe, right? Not even thinking about himself. He's always thinking about the people, which is his people that are under him, saving them on numerous occasions from being destroyed, completely wiped out by God. And the irony is, when we read a couple of weeks ago about Korach accusing Moshe and Aaron of assuming the leadership of Israel for their own self-aggrandizement, for their own personal benefit. It's just so ironic that here he's being told he's going to die, and he's not even thinking about himself. He's not even like, woe is me, I'm going to die, what's going to happen to me, I want to live. His first response, his first thought is to think about his people, the people of Israel. So, where were we? Right. The relatively unusual epithet, God of the spirit of all flesh. So we pointed out that this was an unusual epithet. It was like very majestic, right? We saw that. That was in verse 16. Points forward to the need for a man who has spirit within him, either the spirit of wisdom, Ruach Chokhmah, or the spirit of God, Ruach Elohim. And we mentioned that when it does say that, but it is an interesting point that he's saying. 16. He's calling God Yahweh Elohei Haruchot B'chol Basar, right? The Lord of the spirits for all flesh. So he uses the word Ruchot. And then, where is it? So then when God responds, he says, take Yeshua ben Nun ish asher ruach bo. It says, a man who has spirit within him. So it's the same word, ruach. That Joshua is a man who has a spirit of wisdom or the spirit of God within him. When I said it, I said that it was a short form of Ruach Elohim, spirit of God. Robert Alt is saying it may be Ruach Chokhmah, spirit of wisdom, which obviously are similar. At any rate, so there it's Ruach. And here, when Moshe is calling God, the God of the Elohei HaRuchot, the same word, Ruach, Ruchot. Okay? So when Moshe is calling God by this kind of majestic epithet, that the Yahweh, the God of the spirits of all flesh, that God is responding again by saying Yeshua has the spirit within him. Interesting point. That's why I like Robert Alter's translation. Translation and commentary so well. It brings out a lot of interesting points. All living flesh has an animating spirit or life breath in it, but only the few are endowed with the spirit of understanding or visionary presence. Okay? Go out before them and come in before them. This idiom has a sense of to lead in battle, as we mentioned, right? It almost always refers to leading in battle. An appropriate role for Yeshua, who will command the Israelite forces in the conquest of the land. The same two verbs are used in the next clause transitively in the causative conjugation, and there the translation adds on the march to underscore the military implication of the idiom. So, So just very briefly in verse 17, Yotziem, that's the causative of Yitzeh and Yavo. If you don't know what causative is, it's all right. Second, Asher Yitzeh Lifneim, Asher Yavo Lifneim, Asher Yotziem, Asher Yivi'em, Lo Tiem Adat Yahweh Tzon Asher Inem. Second. Translation adds on the march. Oh, he adds that. Oh, okay. I see. He adds that in his own translation, even though it doesn't sound so. Hebrew. Who got before them and will lead them in and out on the march. So he doesn't say it there explicitly. He's saying that the clear implication, as we mentioned earlier, is of leading them in and out in battle, in military campaigns, right? So he adds on the march to emphasize that these phrases, that he will go out before them and come in before them, is really referring to military campaigns, to leading them in battle. Okay. That the Lord's community will not be like a flock that has no shepherd, though the image of ruler as shepherd of the people is conventional in the ancient Near East. It also harks back, as Richard Elliott Friedman, who I have no idea who that is, aptly observes, to Moshe's own beginnings as a shepherd and his first dialogue with God at the burning bush to which he had come while tending the sheep. Okay? Lay your hand upon him. In the event, Moses will lay both hands on Joshua. Jacob Milgram, who is the expert on Leviticus, expert on the tabernacle and cultic worship, and I have read some stuff. Very, very, very brilliant scholar, arguing that two hands were regularly used for the gesture of passing on leadership. Reads hands here. Against the Masoretic text, Rashi ingeniously makes an interpretive point out of the discrepancy between hand and the plural hands in verse 23. Moses acted more generously, more than he had been commanded, for the Holy One said to him, lay your hand, but he did it with both hands and turned Joshua into a chock-full vessel and filled him with his wisdom generously. Okay, it's a nice, cute little Rashi, as long as you don't believe it as meaning exactly what the Torah is saying. Okay, something to be grandeur. We just read this. And inquire of him for the ruling of the Umim. Okay, so I think the comment he's going to make here is exactly what I was thinking. So I should have mentioned it, but it just kind of like flashed in my head, and then I let it go out the other end. But I think this is also a very good point. Joshua's lesser stature in comparison with Moses is reflected in the fact that he will be dependent upon an institutionalized intermediary, the high priest manipulating the oracular device of the Urim and Tumim instead of speaking with God as a man speaks with his fellow man, as Moses is said, right, at the end of Deuteronomy. The Urim and Tumim were evidently two stones or dice-like carved objects that yielded yes or no responses to inquiries. The two terms begin respectively with the first and last letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Urim begins with Aleph, Tumim begins with Taf. Those are the first and last letters of the Hebrew alphabet. More conjecturally, Urim may be related to the root resh, to curse, like arur, haman, and tumim to the root tum tet taf mem tam, which means innocent. Okay, speculative. Usually, well, if you look at the logo of Yale University, and I think I've pointed this out before, you will see something interesting. So this is the official logo of Yale University, and since its founders were very, very religious individuals, in fact, all of these colleges, Yale, Harvard, Princeton, I believe as well, I'm sure, they were all founded as basically seminaries. Their original purpose was to train ministers for, I don't know what denomination of Christianity. And I think a lot of the founders of these various universities, I think of Yale in particular, had a very strong affinity towards the Hebrew and towards the Tanakh. In fact, I know for a fact that until the mid 1800s at Yale University, in order to graduate, you had to show fluency or competency, at least, in biblical Hebrew. At any rate, on the logo, on the official Yale logo of Yale, it says Urim Bitumim. Underneath, in Latin, it says Lux et Veritas. So this is the way that Urim and Tumim is often translated. Lux et Veritas means light, just as in Spanish, lux is luz, as I'm sure some of our listeners know. Et is and veritas is truth, just like verify, or in Spanish, verdad, right? Veritas and verdad, lux, luz, right? So Urim, or in Hebrew light in Hebrew is or, and tam means innocent or pure. So by extension, truth. So this is the way that many people have understood the words Urim and Tumim as light and truth. And so it made it right onto the official logo, which has been the official logo of Yale for I don't know how long, centuries probably. I don't know exactly when they adopted it, but Yale was founded in 1701. So I think not long after that. So on the official logo of Yale is the Urim and Tumim in Hebrew, and the Latin translation How ironic that in this day and age, Yale does not represent light and does not represent truth. Perhaps they should change their logo to darkness and lies. But I doubt they'll be doing that anytime soon. At that happy note, we shall end the study. Are there any final questions or comments? You can type them in. You can ask them. And if not, we'll end the study. It's been a really, really good, interesting study. I wish we had more time to finish the parsha, but it's a pretty long parsha, and I don't. Hopefully, Bizarat Yahweh will pick it up next week. And Emily Engels says he thinks that Moses was unclean due to corpse contamination after Miriam's death when he performed the miracle. That is what got him in trouble with deity. Okay. He thinks that Moses was unclean due to corpse contamination after Miriam's death when he performed the miracle, and that is what got him in trouble with deity. I don't know. I think that's speculation. I think that's complete speculation, as a matter of fact. Also, why would Moshe, why would he remain unclean? Where's any indication that he was unclean at that point? And even if he was unclean, then why would he be required to be clean to perform the miracle of the water? It did not take place within the sanctuary area, right? It took place out at the rock, and one is really only to be required to be in a state of purity, of cleanliness, when one enters the sanctuary area. So unless you could show some proof of that, I'm going to have to respectfully say that I don't agree with that interpretation. Okay. Any other comments? Any other questions? No? Okay, then. We're going to end this Torah study. Hope you all enjoyed it. I certainly did. It's from Sweeney's article. Who's Sweeney? It's a movie about a person eating flesh. Sweeney or something? I don't watch a lot of movies. All right, I'll look it up. Sweeney's article. Well, if you want, you could just email me or text me on Facebook or the WhatsApp group. Okay, I'm not sure, but just because someone named Sweeney, who I don't know who that is anyway, says it, of course, doesn't make it true. But I don't know. I don't see any indication of that. So unless you could bring some proof from the Tanakh, I think I would have to decline agreeing with that. Okay, at any rate, let's end it here. Thank you all very much for joining me. Hope you'll join me next week. This has been Hakham Melech ben Yaakov of the World Alliance of Qara'im, saying Shabbat Shalom. And let's go out with some more underwater footage from not the Dead Sea, as I made a mistake, and I originally said this is underwater footage from the Dead Sea. So whoever watches the beginning of the video is going to say, God, that Melech is a complete idiot. I mean, what an idiot. He calls himself a Karaite Chacham, and he says his life, this is a footage from the Dead Sea. Any rate, footage from the Red Sea. Here we go.